Chapter 564. At this point, the only thing that kept the Scarlet Cross soldiers going was their spirit and glory. The mages at the rear had already started to retreat, and the only ones who could support the main formation were the few High Elf Ranger archers. If there were no accidents and this continued, then very soon, this outstanding army would disappear forever. Only Duque knew that this wasn't something that could be taken lightly. Because the Scarlet Crusade was defeated, not only would its past disappear along with it, not only would its prestige and the head of the Mograine family disappear, if even Alexandros Mograine and Abendis were to die here, then the Scarlet Crusade that was supposed to appear in the future would completely disappear from this land. That's right, an army was just a military unit. But the Scarlet Crusade was a fanatical military organization. The famous Scarlet Crusade had existed in the history of Azeroth for decades after the flames of war had been raging all the way to the end. This won't do. Duque, let us dwarves go. Magni Bronzebeard shouted anxiously. How many tribes could 40,000 dwarven warriors destroy in a field battle? It definitely wouldn't be little, but it definitely wouldn't be much either. Duque raised his chin and smiled mischievously. My dear Magni, don't you think this is the time to use the secret I taught you? Could it be that? Yes. That's it. Secret, let's grig. A toast to our great Mother Rock. You finally remembered them. Magni, who was a crooked stick, actually took out a narrow metal bottle from his waist and took a sip of the dwarven liquor. 3 red flares finally rose above Magni's chariot. Behind the dwarven infantry, there was a sudden rumble of machinery. Duque's facial muscles twitched. This sound felt worse than the tractors in the countryside before he transmigrated. Alright. Technology propelled civilization. I'll accept it no matter how bad it is. When the 40,000 dwarven warriors formed a dense formation to resist the attack of the orcs, the dwarven steam tank army finally arrived. Woo-woo, that was the sound of the whistle that made Duque's balls hurt and the dwarves' spirits soar. Can you tell me why a tank has a whistle like a steam train? The steam tank, billowing black smoke, arrived. This world had pseudoscience that Duque could not understand no matter how hard he thought about it. When the dwarves processed things, because of the lack of industrial foundation, the precision of the parts was very unreliable. However, the dwarves could ignore the basic principles of steel forging technology and could use their hands to create long and tough steel that should only be produced by modern high-tech industries. This was the new steam tank that Duque insisted on naming as Chariot 4. It had tougher, thicker armor, stronger driving force, and a thicker cannon barrel. Not only did it have the 2 rows of huge steel wheels of the traditional steam tank, but also, according to Duque's requirements, the tracks made by the dwarven craftsmen were used. In theory, as long as the power was sufficient, the new steam tank could completely overcome any complex terrain. And Duque clearly told the dwarves that as long as one side of the track was braked, the tank could complete the turn. Looking at the big steel bunkers passing by him, Duque suddenly felt very proud. Maybe, by cooperating with the dwarves, I can get a lot of black technology in less than 10 years. As soon as he finished speaking, Duque saw a steam tank as high as a story lying not far from him. Just when Duque thought that a few dwarven craftsmen would jump out to fix something, he suddenly saw many short and thick hairy legs at the bottom of the tank. Then, in the chant of 1, 2, 3, the steam tank, which no longer billowed black smoke from its chimney, continued to charge at a speed not inferior to its compatriots. Great Inventor Du's face instantly collapsed. Ha! Magni laughed loudly. We dwarves are not like those idiotic goblins. We can always solve any problem. Alright, when I go back, I will use my Du's wild cursive to write the word convinced for you. But the effect was obvious. There were many new recruits who were farmers on the Alliance's side, but the Horde's side was not much better. There were not many orcs of the Bloodring clan left after the siege of the Iron Furnace Castle. The new Horde recruits were not only weaker than the elite veterans who had experienced the Draenei War, but also had a clear difference in physique and combat ability. Most importantly, these young men who had just come of age were mostly country bumpkins who had not seen the world. Baron Geddon and the Red Dragon had already been shocked. When they saw the sudden, incomparably huge iron lump, the word dumbfounded, was written on each of their faces. Don't be afraid. These things are easier to destroy than human houses. A veteran of the Blood Ring clan carried a wooden stake and rushed forward, hitting the new steam tank, Chariot number 4 in the head. Clang. There was a loud sound. When Duque had asked for the front armor of the tank to be 200 millimeters thick, the crazy dwarf craftsman had directly covered it with 2 layers of 200 millimeters thick iron armor because their craftsmanship had not been up to standard. The result of this round of heavy blows was that there was an inconspicuous dent in the front of the tank. Then, the guy who had rushed forward was stabbed to death. That's right, Duque had asked for the front armor of the tank to be equipped with horns and spikes. The guy who had talked big and thought that the new tank would be as easy to break as before had paid the price with his life. The new horde recruits were suddenly a little afraid. The dwarf commander on the steam tank shouted, "Open fire!" The next moment, the firing holes around the entire steam tank burst into flames at the same time. Several orcs who had surrounded the tank and tried to attack it from the side were shot in the head by the dwarves' thick-barreled muskets. 3 seconds later, the cannon installed on the tank opened fire. There was a large-caliber mortar in the huge semicircular ironclad turret. Originally, Duque had wanted to get a 3-pounder cannon, but unfortunately in this era, there was no recoil mechanism. Even the recoil of a small-caliber cannon was likely to cause the tank to fall apart. He could only settle for the next best thing, which was the simpler mortar. That's right, it was to put the shell into a solid barrel filled with black gunpowder and ignite it. In the next second, only God knew where the big iron ball would fly to. Even though the new Chariot number 4 had all kinds of problems and terrible pseudo-technology, these crazy iron lumps really made the orcs dumbfounded. Chapter 565. Unlike World War II before Duque's transmigration, that was the era of firearms. In this era where cold weapons were the main weapons, Duque had made many improvements to the 4th tank. For example, the spikes and ram at the front of the tank, as well as the addition of a triangular steel tip similar to that of an icebreaker. On both sides of the tank, Duque had originally wanted to follow the style of a tank and use armor that was closer to the ground to protect the wheels and tracks. The great gnome craftsman Gerben had said, "Why not install razors like a horse-drawn tank?" In the end, there were a dozen long steel spikes extending from the bearings of the wheels on both sides. When the tank was moving at high speed, anyone who got too close to the side of the tank would definitely be cut in half by the high-speed rolling steel spikes. Because the back of the tank was where the dwarves boarded, there was relatively little protection. But that was only relatively speaking. There were more than 10 small holes on the rear deck. Even if the dwarves were not used to it, they could still fire from the holes and use their spears to teach the people outside how to behave. These number 4 war chariots, which could both attack and defend, and could also advance at high speed, easily scattered the orcs' formation. The only ogres that could pose a threat to the 4th tank were killed one by Duque's Windrunner Rangers. Following closely behind the 4th tank were the simpler armored vehicles with open roofs. These armored vehicles that had been hastily produced did not have as strong an assault ability as the 4th tank, nor were they equipped with mortars. To supplement the 4th tank, 12 dwarf gunmen and 12 grenadiers were arranged on the upper deck of the armored vehicles. Naturally, what they threw were the iron grenades that Duque had used extensively when defending Stormwind City. These crude engineering products were not very effective against orc warriors, but they were quite effective against armed orc laborers. Even if the Dark Iron Dwarves fully supported the tribe, they could not possibly have enough resources to give all 250,000 orcs full-body armor in one go. After all, there were still very few who had full-body armor. Those hard workers were only given a relatively sharp iron weapon each. These people did not even have shoes and were equivalent to slaves. What could they use to defend against the shrapnel of the iron grenades? 300 tanks and 500 armored vehicles advanced from the right flank, plowing through the entire left flank of the orcs as if they were plowing the ground. Following closely behind them were the 40,000 dwarf commandos who were frantically finishing off their attacks. Finally, the orcs' left wing, which could not withstand this unknown and terrifying attack, completely collapsed, and they began to flee in disorder. The orcs' military formation was not as distinct as the humans. When they fought, they swarmed forward like a swarm of bees. Therefore, the left flank of the orcs was also the left flank of the entire army. And this wavering directly affected Orgrim, who was still fighting on the front lines. After sending 5 human warriors flying with a swing of his hammer, Orgrim noticed that the number of beastmen on the left suddenly decreased. When he turned his head, he saw a scene that made him want to split open. The warriors of the tribe were actually fleeing? No, not just the left wing. Orgrim could also see that the dwarves' giant iron lumps had already killed their way through the entire left flank. They had started to turn and had already circled around to the rear of the Horde's army. It seemed that in less than 20 minutes, they would be able to kill their way through the entire tribe's formation, entering from the left and exiting from the right. No one knew better than Orgrim what it meant for the Alliance to wipe them out. They had fought countless battles with the Alliance, and every time the Alliance's cavalry killed their way through the Horde's formation, the Horde would definitely swallow the bitter fruit of defeat. What are the other chiefs doing? Orgrim roared angrily. Suddenly he saw a chief of a second-rate clan gathering a large group of orc warriors, carrying huge tree trunks, as if preparing to attack the giant iron lumps. There was a loud noise, and a large cloud of black smoke rose from the largest iron lumps. A second later, the group of at least 300 orc warriors were all blown into the sky, in the form of body parts. What is this? Orgrim was dumbfounded. It was not that he had never seen the dwarves' strange but useless gadgets, but he had never seen such a terrifying war machine. Was it newly made? Or had the dwarves been hiding it and endured until now? It was easy to be afraid of the unknown. One by one, the orc clans began to collapse and flee. Even though the orc trumpeters were still blowing the horn to attack, they still lost their minds and tried to rush back to the Blackstone fortress that was 3 kilometers away. In their hearts, that was the only safe harbor. This place was the orcs' nightmare. Come back. You bunch of gutless trash. Orgrim screamed at the top of his lungs. Unfortunately, the only reason his voice was able to travel more than 100 meters in this noisy battlefield was because his voice was loud enough. On the other side, as if they had seen hope, the Alliance soldiers began to run back. The commanders of the Alliance raised their flags high, and the defeated soldiers continued to gather under the flags that symbolized courage. Even though they were wearing different armors and wielding different shields, new formations of humans appeared one after another. Not only that, Orgrim saw the light of a portal at the back of the human formation, and the mages that the orcs feared the most began to re-enter the battlefield. The magnificent magic light appeared again. It poured down on the orc battle line that had lost their spirit. No! Ancestor, where are you? Please protect me. For the tribe. This was the collapse of the morale, and also the collapse of the orcs' only path to victory. I can't accept this. Orgrim roared like a madman. Victory was so close, as if it was within his reach. It was so close, but why did it disappear in the blink of an eye? Or was it that from the beginning, the Horde taking over the entire planet Azeroth was an unrealistic hope? The invincible Horde, the Horde that once ruled over an entire world. What's wrong with you? Didn't the Draenei create a bunch of strange things back then? So what? Didn't the Horde still win? Why did this familiar scent of victory begin to drift away from the tribe ever since they set foot on this land of the other world? Orgrim still remembered the scent before the battle. The bravest warriors of each clan would bring the young orcs to battle, and before the battle, they would tell them about the Horde's inheritance and the belief of victory. They fought bravely, conquering one enemy after another. It was like this 5 years ago, 100 years ago, and thousands of years ago. They thought that this belief would be passed down from generation to generation. This power inherited from their ancestors should also be passed on to the descendants of the Beastmen. Why did these young Beastmen forget this courage? Orgrim's eyes widened in anger. He couldn't accept this, he wasn't willing. He was still looking for a chance to turn the tables. All of a sudden, he thought he had found it. Chapter 566. That was Duke Marcus. Perhaps he wasn't the commander of the Alliance, nor was he the leader, but Duque's role in the Alliance was definitely above those two. If they killed him, they would definitely be able to stop the Alliance's offensive. Without this super genius commander who was full of strange ideas, the Alliance was just a bunch of old fogies who only knew how to fight regular wars. Baron Geddon, the servant of King of Flames, retreated. Before he left, he sent a message from the Flame Queen. Red Dragon Queen Alexstrasza swore that unless the King of Flames threatens the safety of the world, she will never invade the King of Flames territory again. This allowed Orgrim to see hope again. Without Duque, Orgrim could defend Blackrock Mountain to the death. With a small number of Horde defending Blackrock stronghold, he could free up his main force to attack the Elven Forest and chase the humans of Stormwind into the sea again. As long as they could survive until winter, the Horde would be able to breathe. At least half of the southern continent would be enough for them to report to the other chiefs. The ideal was beautiful, but the reality was cruel. Duque noticed Orgrim's intention. Even though they were a few hundred meters apart, Duque still smiled at Orgrim and waved goodbye. My magic circuits are all broken now. Even moving a finger hurts my muscles. You want me to duel with an angry warrior boss? That would really be laughable. Of course, Duque didn't care about Orgrim at all. Everything that needed to be set up had already been set up. Muradin Bronzebeard was at the back with 2 shields to cover for Duke, while Magni was at the front with 2 large axes to give orders. On top of the tank, the 3 Windrunner sisters' 6 white breasts were swaying around Duque. They were actually shooting at the Horde. If Duque stopped charging and turned back to duel with Orgrim, then he would be an idiot. At first, Orgrim thought that he would be able to reach Duque in less than a minute if he gave up on the front lines. The funny thing was, when he wanted to rush forward, the tank under Duque had already accelerated. It was obvious that the driver of the tank was driving without a license as well. As he sped along the way, he crashed into countless orcs and cut open their stomachs, but he still managed to reach a speed of 40 kilometers per hour. For a steam tank, this was an incredible speed. Of course, it was another matter if the boiler would burn down or not. While Orgrim was still dumbfounded, Duke's tank galloped off with the rest of the tank squad to destroy the Horde's right flank, which was still relatively intact. Orgrim had no choice but to turn around. He looked at everything in despair. The Horde was initially in a good position, but now it had turned from a rout into a fierce battle. In Orgrim's vision, the battle lines that were advancing with great difficulty had become crisscrossed. Even though there were a few times when the tribal chief led the veterans to attack and almost broke the human line, the strong will of the human soldiers completely subverted the impression that every Horde warrior had of the humans since the start of the war. The orcs on the right flank attacked with all their might, successfully breaking a huge gap in the formation. However, the Dalajan soldiers, who had never had much will to fight, were unexpectedly fighting with all their might. If it was before, they would be crying and screaming as the orcs would chase after them like ducks. But now, it was different. The human soldiers would quickly form smaller circular formations and continue to resist. If it was not possible, they would use all methods to fight back against the orcs. If their swords broke, they would use their shields to smash them. If their shields were broken, they would use their daggers to stab them. If their daggers were gone, they would pick up the weapons of their fallen comrades. If they could not pick up any more, even if they knew they would die, they would still charge forward with their fists. Their attacks were neutralized at the last moment, and the orc army on the right flank was unable to advance for a long time. The battle was extremely fierce. Blood even dyed the dirty black soil red. Rustle, rustle, rustle. The spear throwers of the Alliance returned. They mustered up their courage again and almost reached the back of the shield swordsmen. They threw their spears at the orcs no more than 20 meters away from the front line. Whoosh, whoosh, whoosh. The FFF flamethrower team also arrived. Under the guidance of some experienced commanders, they gave up on attacking the Blackrock tribe's orcs and turned to find the new green-skinned ones. Orgrim panted heavily, but his heart was cold. The sharp javelins started to cover the sky, and the black earth started to be covered with more beastman blood. Countless beastmen brandished their weapons and rushed past their great tribal chief. However, Orgrim soon heard countless screams of despair and anger. He seemed to want to stop the tribe from falling into the abyss of failure, but he found that it was useless. "Great Chief, we can't go on. What must we do?" Lexa killed an alliance warrior with his axe and rushed over. There were no more beasts around him. Orgrim stared at the orc who had helped him block Duque's attack in grim battle. Kashtrak was dead, and Lexa relied on his ogre bloodline and his strong body to survive. Now, Lexa, who had saved his life, was the captain of his guards. Orgrim smiled. Yes, we must do something. The tribe, which had been repeatedly weakened, was like a dilapidated wall, blocking all the light and all the hope. That's right, the tribe's first policy of massacre was to dig a grave for themselves. Perhaps it was possible to defeat a single race like the Draenei, but against the wider Azeroth, it was suicide. Orgrim had always strived to change, to find a way for the tribe to flourish and prosper. In the haze, Orgrim seemed to see the light of dawn penetrating through the dark wall and peeking through the hole in the decaying wall. He really wanted to see the scenery behind the wall, but before that, whether he would be crushed under the wall and die, or push down the wall, see a more beautiful scenery, and usher in a more perfect new life, all depended on his final struggle. Who else could help the tribe turn the tables? Suddenly, Orgrim saw a group of knights rushing into the battlefield. The flag with the head of a lion was so dazzling that Orgrim would never forget it. It was the golden lion flag of Stormwind. Stormwind was the first kingdom that the orcs conquered after coming to this world. Now, it was the counterattack of this kingdom that had lost its capital that put the tribe in a desperate situation. Chapter 567. The Knights of Stormwind charged into the battlefield, and hundreds of orcs were trampled to death by the iron hooves of the warhorses. Those who managed to dodge were hit by the knights' swords and hammers. There were not many of them, only about 1,000 of them. However, their appearance accelerated the collapse of the horde's frontline. In this life, due to the participation of a certain someone, Lothar and Orgrim's direct confrontation was cut off. Therefore, this was the first time the two of them had truly met each other. This was not important. On the mysterious side, it was the great sixth sense that allowed them to sense each other. On the ordinary side, it was a matter of aura. Both of them were very eye-catching and powerful characters. Lothar himself was a giant among the humans, and his strong physique was not inferior to that of ordinary orc warriors. It was destined that he could not ride those weak horses. When he became the commander of the alliance, Tyrenas, in order to please him, gave him a batch of giant beast-class horses. This giant warhorse was called Light of Lordaeron. Just its back alone was nearly 2 meters tall. Its legs were as thick as those of an elephant, and it weighed more than a ton. It had to eat at least 4 times the feed of an ordinary horse for a meal. Matching its huge size was its astonishing endurance and explosive power. Even with 800 pounds of weight, it could still run at 90% of its speed for more than a kilometer. Naturally, it was equipped with the best horse armor. And Lothar, who was wearing a shiny silver armor, was naturally quite outstanding. With his physique, people would even believe that he was riding on an orc warrior from afar. With a larger Stormwind shield and a giant sword that emitted a dazzling golden light, anyone who looked at him would think that Anduin Lothar was a god of war who had descended to the mortal world. Orgrim was not bad either. Surrounded by a group of frenzied ogres, the burly Orgrim swung a black hammer that emitted flames from time to time. His long tassels swung left and right as he swung the huge black hammer in his hand. Every time he swung the hammer, at least one alliance soldier would be pulverized along with their armor. Their broken limbs and flesh would be ignited by the flames, turning into small meteors that fell onto the charred ground. Unlike the rough and casual gait of an ordinary orc warrior, this Hercules moved swiftly and cautiously. Even though he was wearing a huge and heavy black plate armor, it did not affect his agility at all. This set of plate armor was also not an ordinary item. Even if it was hit by a sharp spear, the hard armor could still easily deflect the spear. Orgrim Doomhammer. Anduin Lothar. Even though they were separated by 100 meters, the two of them still recognized each other from afar and called out each other's names. They smiled knowingly at the same time. This was the leader of the alliance, Horde, and also the person they had always wanted to find. If they could defeat this person, the morale of the alliance, Horde, would definitely collapse. That's right, This person was the heaviest weight on the scales of victory. Go to hell! Orgrim casually swung the black hammer that looked extremely heavy to the humans, and easily sent the upper body of a human soldier in front of him flying. Ignoring the twitching corpse, Orgrim kicked the butt of an orc warrior in front of him, and kicked him away. Seeing the massacre caused by Orgrim, Anduin clamped his horse's abdomen and charged into the battle. A two-headed ogre noticed Anduin, and he raised his huge hammer high up and smashed it down with all his might. Under the effect of the violent force, the hammer that was thicker than an adult's thigh cut through the air with a sharp, whistling sound. Anduin did not even use his shield, nor did he change the direction of his beloved horse. The huge, broad-bladed sword suddenly flashed, and the ogre's two heads and shoulders were cut off. Like a knife cutting through butter, Anduin led the Storm royal family's knights forward at a high speed. He waved his shining divine sword and swept away all the obstacles along the way like a raging wave. From the beginning to the end, the supreme commander of the alliance had his eyes firmly fixed on the orc chief. Come! Orgrim's arrogant roar almost pierced through the clouds. His eyes did not leave Anduin either. Even though there was a fierce battle raging around him, any alliance soldiers who tried to get close to him were either killed by Rexer and the other orcs with their fiercest momentum, or entangled by the other orcs. Occasionally, one or two warriors would rush to Orgrim, but after a flash of the black hammer, there would be no more. Anduin's high-speed warhorse was very troublesome. Orgrim still remembered how the abominable 12 paladins rushed past him and turned the tribe's formation upside down. Orgrim decided to solve this problem immediately. Facing Anduin's high-speed charge, he swung his hammer in an undulating arc in the air. How could a hammer be so light? Anduin was indeed stunned for a moment. Orgrim really did it. He wielded the hammer of destruction, that weighed more than 100 kilograms like it was an embroidery needle. In the next moment, the huge hammer had sped up and hit the horse's head. It was almost foreseeable that in the next second, the horse's head would be smashed by the terrifying hammer, and blood would flow out of its shattered skull. Then, the famous Rotterdam Kingdom horse would twitch and die. Something amazing happened again. The intelligent warhorse suddenly raised its head and dodged the fatal blow by a hair's breadth. Then, the high-speed warhorse suddenly stopped on its hind legs and stood up on its forelegs. With lightning speed, it kicked Orgrim's chest. Arg! Orgrim, who was caught off guard, was kicked and fell backward. Anduin seized this once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. Quell, Zarum struck down like lightning. In the next moment, the dignified Chief Orgrim was about to die in the hands of Anduin, the war god of the Alliance. In the blink of an eye, Rexer arrived. The two battle axes that were stained with blood created two bolts of lightning in the void. One was aimed at Anduin's right abdomen, and the other at his chest. The muscles on Anduin's right arm that was wrapped in armor suddenly swelled. At this critical moment, the Quell, Zarum that had already been struck had a fluctuation that seemed like it should not have. Clang, clang. Rexer's axes were instantly cut into 4 pieces by the Quell, Zarum. Impossible. Rexer was at a disadvantage. Chapter 568. If Grom Hellroar, who had fought many battles in the Silverpine Forest, was fighting Anduin, he would definitely not be so careless. Only a true high-grade epic weapon could barely avoid being cut in half by Quell, Zarum. Hence, Bloodhowl was only a passing grade. Unfortunately, there were no ifs. Even Grom himself was hiding in the depths of the Tirisful woodland. Not only could the tribe not find him, even the Alliance could not find him. No one informed the tribes at the Eastern Front. Anduin's combat power was terrifying. During the First War of the Dark Portal, when the tribe was fighting Stormwind, there were no famous chiefs who fought with Anduin. Rexer, who did not receive any news, was at a great disadvantage. If it wasn't for Rexer straightening his waist at the last moment and dodging backwards like an iron bridge, no matter how strong Rexer's physique was, he would have been cut in half diagonally. The result of this attack was a terrifying wound that was more than 1 meter long and 30 centimeters deep. It went from Rexer's left shoulder to his chest and right abdomen. It looked like Rexer's intestines had been cut open and he was dead. That was only for ordinary humans and orcs. For Rexer, who had inherited the bloodline of the ogres, his chest and abdomen muscles were twice as thick as steak. Although the sword was very painful and he would definitely lose his combat power, it was not enough to kill him. Rexer! Orgrim roared. Even though his body was falling backward, he could still move his muscles and hit the horse's left foreleg with a backhand hammer. The light of Lordaeron let out a shrill neigh in pain. Anduin immediately realized that the horse was about to die. After all, war horses were not griffins. They did not have such tenacious vitality and powerful combat power. Orgrim did not use all his strength, but it was enough to temporarily cripple the warhorse. Anduin jumped up from the stirrups and got off the horse with a gorgeous somersault. He did not forget to pat the horse's buttocks when he dismounted, meaning that his beloved horse should take care of itself. The royal knights and the ogre guards were in a mess. Intentionally or unintentionally, only Anduin was left facing Orgrim. The battle around them seemed to have faded away from their world. This was a pinnacle showdown left for the supreme leaders of both sides. The two big shots raised their weapons at the same time. On one side was the storm greatsword, Quell Zerum, engraved with golden runes. On the other side was the black hammer, Hammer of Destruction, that Kieran fished out from the lava of the volcano. Then, in an instant, they collided without saying a word. They only had one goal, to kill each other and put an end to this or war. This was destined to be a difficult battle. Anduin Lothar was a tall, burly man. His physique was similar to that of an orc warrior from a second-rate clan. On the other hand, Orgrim was taller, stronger, and younger. Although Lothar was at a disadvantage in terms of age and speed, his experience and skills made up for it. In the past, Orgrim did not understand why the former great chief Blackhand would die in Lothar's hands despite the huge difference in physique and speed. Even with Duque's schemes, ordinary humans would not be able to survive such terrifying power and speed. But now Orgrim knew. The first to attack was Orgrim. No matter when he swung his giant hammer, there would be a shrill whistle. The weak-willed opponent would be stunned by this, and of course, the price was his life. That was a hammer that was fully exerted. Starting from the front foot, from the bottom up, a power that came from the earth pierced through Orgrim's toned thigh muscles, his chest muscles that were tougher than springs, and his right upper arm that was expanding to the point of exploding. With perfect strength, Hammer of Destruction was like a comet that fell from the 9 heavens. In Lothar's field of vision, it was zooming in at an extremely fast speed. Lothar didn't block it. He carefully stepped forward and nimbly dodged to the left. The hammerhead, which was full of texture, brushed past less than 20 centimeters in front of him. The flames on the hammerhead almost touched Lothar's long hair. A miss was a miss. Lothar did not give Orgrim any time to counterattack. The moment he dodged the attack, Lothar was like a compressed spring that started to bounce back and suddenly launched a counterattack. His great sword followed the direction where the hammer came from and secretly swept towards Orgrim's lower ribs. This was an absolute dead angle. While Orgrim was using brute force to push the hammer back, he was a step too late. Zarum easily pierced through Orgrim's armor and left a deep wound on his right chest that was so deep that his bones could be seen. If it wasn't for Orgrim's quick second hammer strike, Lothar might have already ended the battle. Left with no choice, Lothar dashed past Orgrim's right side. Orgrim's hammer strike missed. When the two of them separated again, Noxus didn't expect Orgrim to swing his hammer horizontally to the right, and the Hammer of Destruction drew a huge semicircle in the air and smashed down on Noxus's back. For a super heavy weapon like this, it would be suicidal to block it without enough mana. Left with no choice, Lothar rolled forward awkwardly and dodged the attack from his back. Lothar quickly stood up and got into a fighting stance. He then faced Orgrim, who turned around. Puff, puff, puff. The two of them had been fighting for a long time, and each of their hands had been stained with the blood of at least 100 enemies. However, they had never panted like this before. "You're hurt." Lothar tried to mentally attack Orgrim. If you're the kind of idiot who is satisfied after injuring your opponent, you can do it 100 more times, and you'll still be the one to die. Orgrim didn't care at all. Lothar curled his lips. This time, Lothar was the first to attack. Zarum, that was emitting a golden light, stabbed forward. Unexpectedly, Orgrim used the top of his hammer to block it. Even if Lothar was holding Zarum, it was definitely not a good idea to use the tip of his sword to block the opponent's hammer. However, Lothar knew that this was the case, but he still did it because he remembered Duque's words. What if the great chief of the tribe, Orgrim, is a noble person who thinks for the entire tribe? Who is Duque? He was recognized as the most knowledgeable, wisest, and greatest strategist in the entire alliance. Duque obtained a wealth of knowledge that mortals couldn't imagine from his old friend's book collection. Duque's foresight was recognized. And he never did anything pointless. Many of the things he did that seemed unimportant and mindless, but in the end, they were all proven to be perfect predictions and preparations. There was no way Lothar would ignore what Duque said. Therefore, this strike was an experiment. If something really happened to Zarum, Lothar would not hesitate to pull out the backup sword at his waist and continue fighting. Chapter 569. The golden sword light and the yellow hammer light collided with each other. Lothar was slightly startled, but the worst-case scenario did not occur. The moment it touched the hammer, the tip of the sword did feel a little bad, but it was definitely not shattering. It was the inevitable reaction of a sharp weapon against an unreasonable heavy hammer. Since he did not use his full strength, there would naturally be some spare time when he changed his move. Both of them prepared for the next move. Orgrim's counterattack was to gently lift the hammer's head, and it only rose less than 20 centimeters before he slammed it down again. He wanted the hammer to hit the blade of Zarum. If Lothar's guess was right, Orgrim was indeed trying to use the inherent disadvantage of the sword to destroy this godly sword. Lothar nimbly took a step to the left, allowing his great sword to avoid the hammer. However, Orgrim then flipped the handle of the hammer and swung the weapon in the opposite direction. The hammer swept under Lothar's chin, causing Lothar to lose his center of gravity and fall back. Then, a completely unreasonable and faster hammer followed, but Lothar raised his sword in time and blocked the hammer's handle. For a moment, both warriors poured all their strength, and Doomhammer once again swung his hammer down, but it was once again pushed aside by Lothar. Both weapons trembled, but they did not move. Then, Lothar twisted the edge of his sword and successfully knocked the hammer away. Then, while Doomhammer retracted his weapon, he leaped forward and slashed with his sword. The battle had reached its climax. 5 minutes ago, the 12 paladins were still in a frenzy. At a suitable time, Gavinrad noticed the reflective signal on the steam tank in the distance, and he immediately shouted, "Look, our commander is dueling with the great orc chief." At this time, whether it was Uther, Turalian, or the other paladins were fighting with the orcs in front of them. Following Gavinrad's shout, almost all the paladins used a violent hammer blow to crack the heads of their opponents. The focus of their attention was on the duel between Lothar and a large orc in the middle of the battlefield. Because they were often dragged by Duque to fight, more than one person in the Silver Hand had seen Orgrim. They immediately realized how dangerous it was. If Lothar won, it would undoubtedly be a battle worthy of praise. If Lothar were to lose, they couldn't imagine what would happen to the alliance if they lost the unified flag. Perhaps the alliance would become more united under the pressure of external forces in the future, but everyone knew that because of the petty actions of the Rotterdam Kingdom, there had already begun to be discordant voices in the alliance. If they lost Lothar, the last descendant of Arthi, at this time, the alliance would likely fall into internal strife. Without the need for any orders, the 12 holy knights immediately turned their horses around and charged towards the center of the battlefield. The heavy warhammer was wrapped in holy light, and it drew golden arcs of light that were even more beautiful than the sword dance. All the orcs that were touched by the arcs of light were easily killed. If someone were to look at the battlefield from above, they would notice that it wasn't just the 12 holy knights. Including the tank unit that launched the Blitzkrieg, there were also 2 other groups of orcs. There were a total of 4 groups of people, and they all wanted to kill a bloody path and rush to the 2 leaders' side. At this time, the 2 leaders once again clashed, swinging their war hammers and giant swords. The intense battle caused their physical strength to decline rapidly, and both of them were clearly not as agile as they were at the beginning. Unable to dodge in time, Lothar was forced to use the lion head emblem shield to block Orgrim's full blow. The violent blow almost made him kneel down, and the sound of the epic-level shield cracking was extremely clear. Lothar lost all feeling in his left arm for a while. However, Lothar did not suffer a loss. The blade of his sword also made a deep cut on the chief's chest armor. The large wound that was more than 5 centimeters deep caused blood to spurt out. Even the black background could not hide the blood. Orgrim staggered backward, his lips contorted in pain and frustration. He then yanked the strap on his shoulder with his left hand and took off the damaged armor. On the opposite side, Lothar also took a step forward and took off the shield that had become a broken door. He then threw it to the ground. Pfft. Lothar spat out a mouthful of saliva that had a fishy smell. Orgrim was even more terrifying. He directly used the high temperature emitted by the hammer of destruction to burn the wound on his chest like a soldering iron to stop the blood from flowing out. Following that, the two of them shouted and once again started to fight. Orgrim, who had abandoned his armor, moved even faster, and Lothar wielded his greatsword with both hands, which made the greatsword even more destructive. After a quick exchange of blows, both of them suffered a heavy blow at the same time. There was a deep cut on Orgrim's abdomen, and even a small part of his intestines could be seen. Lothar's left arm also suffered a heavy blow. His body trembled. He didn't even need to pay attention to the intense pain coming from his left arm. Just by looking at his abnormally bent arm, he knew that his arm was fractured in at least 5 places. Not only his left arm, but even his shoulder felt a heart-wrenching pain. Perhaps his left shoulder was a little broken as well. Both of them stood up shakily, and they were ready to launch their third attack. Orgrim raised his warhammer high with both hands, and with all his strength, he leaped over a distance of nearly 5 meters and slammed it down on Lothar's head. The cunning Orgrim displayed his amazing jumping ability for the first time in front of Lothar. Before this, he had always given Lothar the illusion that he was tall and sturdy, but slow. Obviously, he had succeeded. At this moment, the warrior skill that he used had the intention of killing. At this moment, an accident that Lothar never expected happened. Rexer, who was lying on the ground not far away, suddenly reached out and grabbed Lothar's left foot. The shackle-like confinement made Lothar lose all possibility of dodging. Lothar instinctively raised Cultivation to block the sneak attack, and he gathered all his strength on the blade. Hammer of Destruction smashed down with a scorching aura that seemed to be able to destroy everything in the world. Time seemed to freeze, because the sword shattered. When the fragments of the incomparably sharp and hard legendary sword that had accompanied Lothar in battles shattered in midair, everyone who witnessed this scene was shocked. Turalyon felt like he had stopped breathing, and Orgrim's attack was no longer hindered. Hammer of Destruction continued to fall along the Arc of Death, and it smashed down heavily on Lothar's head. At this critical moment, the runes on the armor that Duque specially gave to Lothar suddenly lit up, and a huge metal fist suddenly appeared in front of Lothar's chest. With a rising dragon fist posture, it smashed onto Orgrim's face, and Orgrim was sent flying. Almost at the same time, everyone heard an unknown shout. "Oh, Ugin!" Chapter 570. The sudden change of scenery left everyone who witnessed the scene dumbfounded. What the hell is this? The moment Cultivation was broken, Anduin Lothar was already prepared to die in battle. It wasn't that he didn't hear Duque warning, but he never thought that Cultivation would still be fine even when it wasn't at full power, but when it was at full power, something happened. It could be said that he was tricked by the sword, or that he didn't believe that Orgrim was recognized as a noble person by the sword. Lothar wasn't someone who felt sorry for himself, and he didn't vent his anger on Rexer, who suddenly grabbed his leg. This was a battlefield, not an empty dueling ground. On the battlefield, whether it was fighting with fewer people or bullying with numbers, it was all reasonable. Killing enemies in the most chaotic place and saving one's own life not only required strength, but also luck. For a second, Lothar thought that he had used up all his luck. He never thought that the armor that Duque gave him would have such a magical effect. Most enchanted armors would have an arrow protection, and the best would be intermediate magic shield, which could absorb a certain amount of magical elemental damage for the owner. Although Lothar recognized that this magic came from his armor, he couldn't recognize what kind of strange magic it was. It wasn't too much to say that it was strange. This was because there was no conventional magic that would turn into a metallic fist to hit someone, and there was no magic that would shout, "Oh la 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 la." The magic fist that appeared out of nowhere near Lothar's chest hit the air like a storm. There was no place for Orgrim to borrow strength from, and there was no way for him to dodge. Just like that, Orgrim was beaten black and blue by the mysterious magic fists. These fists weren't fatal, but every one of them made Orgrim grimace in pain. He could only use one hand to block in front of him to prevent his fangs from breaking, and the other hand to protect his lower abdomen to prevent the wound from expanding. Finally, the seemingly endless but actually 81 punches landed on Orgrim, and the shadows of the punches disappeared. Orgrim had already flown more than 10 meters away. Orgrim wasn't willing to give up. He wasn't the kind of person who would give up easily and bow to fate. He didn't stop at all. After his right leg touched the ground, he stomped hard on the ground, and the leap slash that was powerful enough to split a mountain appeared again. Even though Lothar had kicked Rexer away and pulled out his spare saber, Orgrim could still tell that Lothar's spare saber was far inferior to Quell Zarum in terms of quality. One strike. Just one more hammer strike. I will be able to kill the highest leader of the Alliance on the battlefield. The morale of the Alliance would collapse again, and the weak human soldiers would turn around and run again, crying and screaming, and the Horde would be able to turn the tables. The voice in his heart was so loud that Orgrim completely forgot about what was happening in the outside world. He focused all his attention on Lothar's movements. He could tell that Lothar was about to jump back. That would be meaningless. When he jumped, he had calculated at least 2 steps in advance, and it looked like the trajectory of his jump slash was the same as before. If Lothar retreated, he would be able to catch up. If Lothar didn't retreat, he would be able to flip over Lothar's head and land a fatal blow on the back of his head. As expected, Lothar fell for the trap. As a pure warrior, he couldn't compare to Orgrim, who was more creative in scheming. After jumping back, he was shocked to find that he was still enveloped by Orgrim's flaming hammer. If there were no accidents, Lothar would still die. Looking at the magic runes on Lothar's armor that had dimmed again, Orgrim knew that the armor wouldn't be a problem for the time being. Orgrim's face revealed a victorious smile. Of course, in Lothar's eyes, it was a sinister and cruel smile. At this moment, Orgrim's concentration was broken. With a horrified expression, he looked at the arrow that was like a meteor from outer space, traversing half of the battlefield and heading straight for him. This can't be? The sinister smile turned into a scream. In midair, Orgrim wanted to tilt his body to dodge the arrow coming from his left, but to his horror, he found that the green arrow had made a turn in the air and was still shooting towards him. Orgrim was still unwilling to give up on his jump slash. He swung his left fist with all his might, preparing to forcefully knock away the arrow at the cost of his left hand becoming a bloody mess. In the next moment, time seemed to stop. This was because Orgrim was horrified to find that it wasn't 1 arrow, but 3. Behind the first light green arrow, there was a steel all-tipped arrow that suddenly burst with lightning, and a gale-fast arrow that was almost hidden in the wind, on the same track. Orgrim had nowhere to hide. In that instant, a beast-man with a broken arm and a sawtooth war blade as a prosthetic arm rushed out, blocking in front of Orgrim. It was Kargath Bladefist, the chieftain of the Shattered Palm clan, who had arrived at the last moment. Unfortunately, it was useless. The 3 arrows seemed to have eyes. They dodged Kargatha's block, drew another arc in the wind, and circled around. The 3rd arrow wrapped in the gale arrived first, and was the first to hit Orgrim. This arrow fiercely shot into his left lung. The 2nd lightning arrow made a muffled pew sound, and passed through Orgrim's entire right shoulder socket, completely penetrating his thick body. The lightning energy on the arrow instantly paralyzed half of Orgrim's body. The 1st green arrow made a turn again, and suddenly pierced into his calf. Ah! Orgrim finally couldn't help but let out a scream, and fell head first to the ground. Orgrim struggled to get up, and staggered a step forward. His left hand pressed hard on his abdomen, which was the biggest wound on his body. Blood flowed out from between his fingers, but he still tried to stand up, and tried to use his right hand to raise the warhammer high up. He failed. The damage that the 3 arrows had done to him surpassed all the damage that Lothar had done to him. Moreover, in the next second, another 3 arrows were shot. This time, Kargath managed to block 2 of them, but the explosive force from the last lightning arrow still sent Orgrim flying. Only then did Lothar look to the left in a daze. He saw Duque sitting cross-legged on a tank that was emitting a deafening roar 100 meters away, surrounded by 3 incomparably beautiful high elf rangers. With a bright smile on his face, Duque waved at Lothar. Yo! Chapter 571. Duque and his men were not the only ones who had arrived. Kilrog, Deadeye, and Zuluhid had brought nearly 1,000 orc warriors with them. On the Alliance's side, the 12 paladins and the entire human army were rushing over. The Storm royal family's knights had already broken through Orgrim's personal guards and rushed to Lothar's side, surrounding the Alliance commander. Not only that, over 100 steam tanks were also rushing over. The dwarves were firing with all their might, clearing the entire area of orcs. In the distance, after the tank assault team rushed back and forth, the entire orc army had been cut into several pieces. There were not many horde flags still fluttering on the battlefield. Although these clans were still struggling under the attacks of the humans, more and more mages and heavy cannons entered the battlefield, rendering their resistance useless. Without enough orc warriors gathered together, it was impossible to break through the human army's sword and shield formation. However, if they gathered together, they would have to face the concentrated attacks of the mages. The most terrifying thing was the dwarves' largest tank destroyer. Though it was a huge, cumbersome thing, if it was given a minute or 2 to turn, to aim and load, a shell would shake the earth and the mountains. Within the area it hit, everything within a radius of more than 200 meters would be completely barren. The orc army had fallen into this vicious cycle. If they gathered together, they would be annihilated. If they scattered, they would be killed by the humans' shield formation. In addition, the rear was already in a mess due to the dwarves' blitzkrieg. At the back, there were still 40,000 dwarven infantrymen nailed there, constantly bleeding the orcs. The chants of Loktar, Ogre, could no longer be heard. All they could see were orcs who had thrown away their weapons and fled in panic. Instead, it was replaced by shouts of "Long live the Alliance." High above, Duque, who was sitting on top of a tank, looked down at Orgrim and said something that sounded like a verdict. The Alliance has won. Orgrim crawled up again, and his body shook as he spat out blood. He was so heavily injured that he couldn't even lift up the hammer of destruction, but he still shouted with a hoarse voice, "This time, the Horde has failed. But so what? The Horde will welcome their 3rd great chief. The warriors of every race in the Alliance will die in the hands of the Horde warriors. Until your world belongs to us." Suddenly, Orgrim shouted with all his might, "Zulud, Kilrog, Kargath, let's go! Let's go! The Horde hasn't lost yet. The Horde will never fail." Noxus sighed softly. "Capture him alive." Even though he had lowered his voice, his normally loud and clear voice was no different from shouting in the ears of ordinary people. Led by the 12 paladins, more than 500 paladins charged towards Orgrim. Kargath Bladefist used his actions to replace his reply. His gray muscles bulged inch by inch, and he used his remaining hand to grab Orgrim. What he wanted to do was self-evident. Tyrion Fordring had arrived. Under the acceleration of the warhorse, the hammer arrived at an extremely fast speed. Clang! Kargath used the huge blade on his arm to barely block the attack. Without giving him any time to catch his breath, Gavin Rad and Saidan Dathrahan's hammers struck him at the same time. Wah! Even someone as strong as Kargath, a hero born as a death gladiator, was still sent flying more than 20 meters away under the combined attack of 2 top-notch human martial forces. He rolled on the ground a few times before regaining his breath. Unfortunately, he was already far away from Orgrim. Hammering the ground with his fist, Kargath resolutely retreated. Yes, he had tried his best. Kilrog Deadeye swung his sharp bone-spiked axe, sending a human paladin flying with a single blow. The hard bone penetrated the paladin's plate armor, and even his intestines were hooked out. He used his only remaining eye to look at Orgrim, who had already been rushed to his side by the 12 paladins. Without hesitation he turned around and left. But Zulud, Orgrim's assistant, under everyone's astonished gazes, charged over while swinging his hammer. That's right. He wanted to save Orgrim. Under the watchful eyes of nearly 1,000 human paladins, 12 inhumanly ferocious paladins, and 3 female ranger heroes who were even sharper than the male ranger heroes, he wanted to save his most beloved great chief. This was no longer logic or courage. At this moment, Zulud was more like a fanatical martyr. It wasn't just him. There were also over 300 orc warriors who charged with him. They were all great warriors. Uther! Noxus, who was panting, shouted at the paladin leader. There was no need to say more. Everyone understood. Duque raised his hands and pressed down on Servana's and Sasha's bows. Magni, who was about to order the cannons to fire, also put down his hand. This was the last battle of this campaign. True warriors transcended borders and even races. They deserved to be respected. Uther led a large group of paladins into a trot, and then the horses began to speed up. At this stage of the battle, there were no longer any paladins who still had a lance. The deciding factor was the moment they got close to each other, the paladins' horse-riding skills, and that fleeting moment of life and death confrontation. Closer! Closer! Even closer, Zulud's orc warriors had rich experience in fighting paladins. It wasn't easy to kill a paladin directly. Excellent paladins could dodge or use their cavalry shields to defend against most attacks aimed at their upper bodies. The orcs swung their hammers in arcs, and the lucky ones would be able to hit the paladin's head with all their might. Hundreds of paladins collapsed, and blood flowed out of their shattered skulls. Their limbs twitched as they died. The paladins would either fall to the ground pathetically and be killed by the orcs, or they would jump off at the last moment and roll on the ground before climbing back up to continue fighting. Most of the paladins would control the reins the instant before the orcs' hammers or axes hit their horses, allowing them to avoid death at the last moment. Then, they would use the momentum of the horses to deliver a fatal blow. In the first clash, the Alliance and the Horde had a score of 118-230. Uther perfectly blocked Zulud's attack, and his hammer that contained the power of the holy light smashed heavily on Zulud's right pauldron. Almost everyone who was paying attention to Zulud heard the sound of it shattering. It wasn't just the pauldron that was shattering, but the entire right shoulder. Zulud's entire right chest had been completely shattered by Uther's attack. The arm that was holding the hammer flew high into the air and started to spin in the air. Chapter 572. At this moment, Turalian arrived on horseback, ready to deal the final blow to Zulud. At this moment, Zulud made a move that shocked everyone. He grabbed the lower half of his right arm with his left hand, and with the broken arm and the hammer, he swung it down towards Turalian's head. This was definitely not something a normal person could do. At the same time, it was almost impossible. No one would have predicted that their entire arm would be sent flying. And it was even more impossible for anyone to think that their broken arm would still be able to hold the hammer in their hand tightly. But Zulud did it, and it was out of everyone's expectations. The weapon that was swung down at high speed was like a huge nunchaku. One was his own arm, and the other was his huge warhammer. Even Turalian, who had been through hundreds of battles until now, was a little dumbfounded by this scene. There was no time to dodge, and Turalian reflexively swung the warhammer in his hand again. Before Zulud's warhammer could hit his head, the knight's hammer that was glowing in a holy golden light smashed into Zulud's face. Both of them were hit almost at the same time. Zulud was dead. Under the powerful holy attack, his entire face collapsed under the heavy blow, and under the despairing gaze of great Chief Orgrim, who he respected the most, he fell to the ground. His body twitched, and as his life left his body, nothing could stop the blood from flowing out of his broken head. Turalian, Turalian's holy light had saved his life. The thick holy light suddenly rose up, looking like a glowing eggshell, and it had perfectly saved Turalian from the fate of having his head smashed to pieces and dying. The invincibility of a knight was a life-saving trump card at any time. Any qualified paladin should not die on the battlefield before activating his holy shield. There was danger. No danger. Orgrim didn't show his weakness like everyone expected. He looked at Zulud's body, and the last of his ferociousness exploded. His injured shoulder could no longer lift the heavy hammer of destruction. Suddenly, he pulled out 2 daggers made from the teeth of an unknown giant beast from his waist and began his doomed attempt to break out of the encirclement. This method was hopeless and insane. Under everyone's gazes, it was Turalian who charged forward. He jumped down from his horse and swung his hammer. No one warned Turalian. Everyone knew that Turalian was a steady and thoughtful person. As expected, Turalian spun his hammer at the last moment and hit the orc great chief with the side of the hammer instead of the sharp tip. The well-timed impact knocked Orgrim to his knees and sent him sprawling to the ground. More than one person saw the rise and fall of the orc chief's chest. "You shall receive justice for your grave crime of slaughtering humans," he said to the unconscious Orgrim, the holy light still surrounding him. "You will be paraded in chains in every king city of the Alliance to atone for your sins." Uther came as well. Standing beside Turalian, Uther's body shone with a golden light that was brighter than the brightest sunlight. The orcs could either turn around and run for their lives, or they could only cover their eyes with their arms and cower in the blinding light. Coincidentally, the last orc who dared to rush forward to save their great chief was killed in the light. The holy light faded. Not far away, more than 1,000 pairs of orcs watched dumbfoundedly as their leader was dragged up like a dead dog and tied up with thick chains. Failed. The strongest beastman in the entire horde, the invincible Orgrim in Makara, was defeated. Not only Orgrim, but also Lexa, who was famous among the beastmen for his bravery, was also captured. For the orcs who revered individual strength, this was a shocking matter that was enough to cause their beliefs to collapse. But the great chief lost. "Oh no, we lost. The great chief was captured. Ancestors. The strongest man in Makara was defeated." Not every human could understand the orc language, but that didn't stop them from sensing the fear and weakness in the orcs' cries. "Don't let them get away," Lothar waved his hand. That's right, the orcs weren't surrendering, they were running. Chasing after fleeing soldiers was a tradition since ancient times. The holy knights got on their horses again and chanted prayers while pointing their hammers at the orcs. Holy light shone from the eyes of the paladins, from their hands, from the hammers they lifted. The black scorched ground under their feet was illuminated by the holy light that gushed out from their bodies. Kill these evil beings, turn these rude and evil creatures into dust, and rid the world of their pollution forever. Uther shouted the Church of Holy Light's doctrine. He took the lead and charged forward, throwing out light hammers that were as blazing as the sun. The Holy Knight's Hammer of Wrath contained the Holy Knight's greatest rage against evil. This was the release of the rage in his heart, and it was a judgment from the Holy Light. Many orcs were still running away, and before they could react, they were killed by the hammers made of Holy Light. The Holy Knight's charge broke the temporary silence on the battlefield, and the other orcs and humans started fighting again. The rest of the Alliance's troops followed suit. The orcs fell into panic after witnessing Orgrim's defeat, and nearly 150,000 orcs tried to escape the battlefield. The steep terrain of the Blackstone Fortress was a huge trap for the orcs who were trying to escape. The first point of all fortresses was that they were easy to defend and hard to attack. The narrow terrain was the norm. From the scorching canyon to the Blackstone Mountain, there was only a 45-degree slope that was less than 500 meters wide, and it got narrower the further you went. Other than that, almost all the steep mountains had a slope of more than 70 degrees. If there were pursuers behind, climbing up would be a target. Hundreds of thousands of orcs squeezed at the foot of the mountain. Even though the humans behind them didn't outnumber them by much, none of the orcs dared to turn back and fight. They squeezed with all their might, and even tore at the limbs of their comrades, just for the only way to escape. Fire, fire. Don't be afraid of explosions. Give all our cannonballs to those green-skinned beasts. Magni shouted excitedly. Other than the ones that were destroyed by the orcs or ogres, and the ones that broke down along the way, there were still more than 120 of the new steam tanks gathered at the foot of the mountain. Including the armored vehicles, there were 300 of them. Fortunately, the most insane one was the tank destroyer. Fire the small cannons. Boom. Every time there was a deafening explosion, there would be a storm of blood. The orcs were finished. Chapter 573. The human soldiers cheered. They lined up in a dense shield formation, and with the help of the FFF's flamethrowers, they used raging flames to drive the beastmen to their deaths on the bloody slope that was 1,000,000 times worse than the Azura Road. Over there, almost every inch of land was being bombarded by a barrage of bombardment that was as dense as a storm. The dwarves didn't even need to aim. They just needed to cover their eyes and fire their cannonballs. If they couldn't kill more than 30 beastmen with a single cannonball, they would be unlucky. Towards the end, the 3 Windstalker sisters all lost interest in drawing their bows and shooting arrows. The massacre that was like shooting a fixed target wasn't something to be proud of. Looking at the layers of beastman corpses that covered the entire slope, Aurelia sat beside Duque and gently brushed her beautiful blonde hair. "Hey, Duque, is the war going to end after this battle?" Gently hugging the beauty in his arms, Duque's gaze seemed to transcend the black scorched earth in front of him, past the crimson Redridge Mountains, past the muddy swamp of sorrows, and finally landed on the door of darkness in the cursed land. Maybe there are still some guards left at the door of darkness. But the war is over, for now. Everyone could hear the faint melancholy in Duque's words, and no one refuted Duque's words. Duque had the highest authority in the entire alliance regarding the Horde. "I heard in the wind that the generals and king of the alliance said that we have to destroy the door of darkness," Sasha said calmly as she sat down. Duque let out a disdainful laugh. "What? It can't be destroyed?" Servana's interest was piqued. Duque only said one sentence. If something created by 2 demigods and the Demon King's blueprints can be destroyed so easily by mortals, then those 3 would have wasted their lives. The Guardian Medivh and the demigod Ghoul, Dan at their peak had worked together and used Sardra's blueprints. It was obvious that it wouldn't be simple. Just imagining it gave him a headache. At this moment, a tsunami of cheers sounded nearby. "Long live the Alliance! Long live Azeroth! We won!" Only then did Duque and the Windrunner sisters realize that the bombardment had stopped for a while. Not a single orc could be seen standing upright on the battlefield. At least 1,000 orcs had humbly thrown down their weapons and crawled on the ground, shivering. They were begging for mercy in the orc language that the Alliance soldiers could not understand. But many more orcs died. Perhaps more than 100 orcs had escaped back to the Blackstone Fortress. It was not a threat. Moreover, Muradin Bronzebeard had already begun leading the elite dwarven secret chamber guards into the Blackstone stronghold for the final sweep. At this time, Lothar, who was dressed in casual clothes, came to the side of Duque's steam tank with the help of Turayan. It seemed that his wounds had already healed after the priest used Holy Light spell to heal him. However, the blood that had flowed out would not be replenished so quickly. "Thanks for your armor, Duque." Lothar was still very weak, but he had the brightest smile on his face. "Damn it, you're still so handsome at such an old age. Should I let you die?" As he cursed in his heart, Duke, who had a dark heart for a short period of time, would never admit that he was jealous that Lothar was more handsome than him. "Uncle Anduin, you're old. Don't charge anymore. That's for the young." Duque raised his chin and looked at Turayan, who was beside Lothar. Anduin Lothar bared his teeth and bulged the muscles on his right arm. "Even if I have another 10 years, I can still beat you in arm wrestling. If you allow me to inject mana from the magic circuit into my arm muscles, you won't be my match even if you return to 18 years old." While Duque was speaking, Aurelia suddenly thought of her first night. That was what Duque did. She suddenly flipped out. "Enough, you 2 injured people, go and recuperate. The Alliance won't be able to survive without you 2. Under Aurelia's anger, Duque and Andoin shrunk their heads at the same time, like two children who had done something wrong. The people around them burst into laughter. After a while, Andoin then smiled. "We've won?" Duque nodded. "We've won. The matter of the dark portal can be left to Mograine and Antonidas. What are you going to do next?" Duque looked at Tarina's Menethil II, who had run out again, and suddenly sighed. "Although I don't want to say it, my other battle has just begun." Andoin immediately understood what Duque was referring to. "Stormwind will always be your strongest shield." "Thanks." It did not matter that the others could not understand the conversation between the two of them, as long as they could understand it themselves. In this battle, a total of 238,000 orcs were killed and missing. Apart from Kilrog Deadeye's Bloodring clan, who retreated in advance, almost none of the clans escaped. After a short rest, the pursuing troops set off again. Originally, Andoin and Duque wanted to give the task of pursuing to Mograine. To their surprise, other than Tarina's, all the other kings voted against Mograine's appointment. With no other choice, the two of them could only team up again, leading the Silver Hand Knights, Highland Knights, and 20,000 dwarves to set off first with 50,000 elites. Mograine led the Scarlet Cross army and other main forces, following closely behind them, 3 days behind. The vanguard led by Lothar spent about a week following the retreating army. After crossing the Red Ridge Mountains, they once again met up with the Griffin Legion from the Elven Forest and Duque's private legion. A total of 120,000 soldiers passed through the Swamp of Sorrows in the south, and arrived at the red, withered land that had been drained of energy by evil magic. "Report, we've found the target," the scout reported. Following the scout's footsteps, the Alliance army advanced as quietly as possible. A deep valley appeared in front of them, and the walls of the valley were even taller. In the center of the valley, just as the scout had said, there was a huge door. It was not built on the walls or buildings, but stood out of thin air. When they saw the full view of the Door of Darkness, everyone gasped in surprise. The Door of Darkness was about 40 meters tall and more than 30 meters wide. It was built with a mysterious white-green stone. Its basic structure was just 3 huge rectangular stones stacked in the shape of a door. Right above the door was carved a huge snake. The snake opened its mouth, revealing its sharp teeth. On both sides of the door were 2 huge statues. They were obviously dressed like mages, but both of their hands were holding a huge cross sword. The faces of the statues were deep in the hood, and a dark aura lingered on the statue's face. When others looked over, they could only see a pair of shining eyes. Chapter 574. Inside the stone pillar was the teleportation portal itself, emitting green and black light that was filled with energy. To Antonidas and the other mages, it was still a large vortex that emitted energy and some strange feelings in the large space. "I can feel that the door is extending and deeply embedded in the ground, devouring the energy in the underground magic net," Antonidas reminded Lothar. There were more than 10,000 orcs gathered in front of the door, but they didn't seem to know what to do. They were no longer clans. Perhaps the continuous defeats and the capture of the chief had caused them to lose trust in each other. They no longer trusted each other, and instead became families or hunting teams. It was not an army, but a large number of teams. "We don't have much supplies. Get ready to attack. Destroy them with all your might." Lothar did not hesitate, and planned to directly suppress the entire vanguard and destroy the orcs with simple violence. "Hey, Duque, wait." Duque suddenly stopped Lothar. "Huh." As a commander-in-chief, it was originally a very embarrassing thing for his decision to be stopped by his subordinates. Duque was different. Duque and Lothar were definitely life-and-death friends. Lothar did not take it to heart. Duque walked to Lothar's side and whispered in his ear, "Did you realize that the Rotterdam kingdom is very embarrassed this time?" "So what?" Lothar was a pure warrior, and he was not very good at such politics. "Our supplies have been reduced. It's not because the supply line is too long. The people of Rotterdam reduced their supplies to the front line, citing that the supply line was too long. It sounded reasonable, because Rotterdam was located in the north of the northern continent. In terms of distance, other than Quell, Thus, which was the furthest, No other country was further than him. At the end of the day, it was because they could not get any benefits and had lost face. Hence, Tyrrhena's was in a bad mood. In the end, it became the army that attacked the Dark Portal, and most of the supplies were borne by the devastated Stormwind. Even after recovering Stormwind territory, Duque had already used cement to build a road from Stormwind City to the west through the entire Elven Forest, but there were still many problems. Because the Red Ridge Mountain was newly recovered, the remaining road from the Red Ridge Mountain through the Swamp of Sorrows to the Blasted Lands was still extremely dangerous. The Red Ridge Mountain had many mountains and narrow roads. The Swamp of Sorrows was a bad road. If one was not careful, the wheels would get stuck in the mud and could not get out. Lothar frowned and pondered over Duque's words. How do you think we should fight? Didn't Duke Charmas mention why he doesn't allow some orcs to mine in a casual conversation? Everyone knew that Duke Charmas was King Tyrrhena's trusted aide. His opinion was the same as Tyrrhena's. King Tyrrhena's was too embarrassed to say it out loud, so he let him test the other countries. In this life, history had changed a lot. In the original history, Lordaeron did not suffer as much losses. The Alliance had captured many orcs as captives. Tyrrhena's proposed to set up orc prisons in the various countries in order to drag down the other allies. Because of Duque's involvement, Lordaeron had suffered a huge loss. It was fun when they were fighting for military merits, but the loss of people made Tyrrhena's feel the pinch. In the Battle of Blackrock Tower, Lordaeron lost more than 60,000 people. It was foreseeable that in the next few years, many fields in the territory would be unfarmed, not to mention mining and other dangerous industries. Tyrrhena's had an idea. Should he get some orcs as miners? If not, he could bring more orcs as captives and parade them around Lordaeron. That would appease the people. Lothar was a noble person. He disliked killing captives and women, even if they were orcs who had committed the crime. However, Lothar was not against the idea of using orcs as miners. It had been proven time and time again that Duque's foresight was much better than his and Lang's. Lothar smiled. Then, do you want to fight this battle? I'll do it. After Duque agreed, he waved at Magni. Magni, time to work. Okay. The Alliance bigwigs were a little speechless as they watched Magni move his big butt, which was unique to dwarves, to Duke's side. Speaking of which, the commander of the Alliance had the right to order those big shots who were called generals or kings. But that was only on paper. You're a king, and yet you're so obedient. Really, Magni didn't care that much. The lightning battle arcana that Duque taught him made the dwarves proud in the final battle. Didn't you humans always brag that humans were the main force of the Alliance? Who was the one who launched the surprise attack in the last battle and turned the tide? The Dwarven Tank Corps. Who killed the most orcs? It was the Dwarven Tank Corps. Now, seeing those human bumpkins looking at the lightning flag of the Tank Corps with envy, Magni felt very proud. The only thing that made him depressed was that when he asked Duque to draw the Tank Corps' battle flag, the design was a sloth with a lightning symbol on its back? Aren't the dwarves always ridiculed for having short legs? Now, as long as you drive a tank and overtake the sloth flag, who would dare to laugh at you dwarves for running slowly? That was the logic, but it still felt a little lacking. Forget it, who cares? In the Battle of Blackrock Tower, the Lightning Tank Corps killed more than 150,000 orcs. Such a great achievement was enough for the dwarves who loved to brag in taverns for thousands of years. Then the cannons roared, and the tanks shone brightly. Sitting on the top of the tank at the front, Duque held Nyo in both hands and projected a huge blue phantom storm flag on the tank. It was the exact same Grand Duke Marcus storm flag. It was once stuck in Stormwind City, causing 100,000 orcs to die in a sea of fire. It was once stuck in South Shore Town, causing 100,000 orcs to die at the beach. It was once stuck outside Silvermoon City, causing 100,000 orcs to not dare to advance. It was also in the Battle of the Scorching Canyon, hovering above a group of steam tanks, witnessing the death of 100,000 orcs in that apocalyptic bombardment. It was the nightmare of the orcs, and it symbolized the god of death of the humans, Duke Marcus. Just the appearance of this flag made tens of thousands of orcs tremble uncontrollably. Duque's voice was amplified by magic and resounded throughout the battlefield. It was a broadcast in Orc language. I am the Storm Grand Duke Marcus, and I declare for the last time that all orcs will be spared if they surrender. Otherwise, shall then die, ha. The domineering evil declaration was full of arrogance and terror. If not for Duque's actual achievements, this would just be the barking of a mad dog. But this was the declaration of that Duke Marcus. 1, 2, countless of them. The orcs dropped their weapons and knelt before Duque as if on a pilgrimage. They lowered their arrogant heads that they thought they would never lower, and prostrated on the ground. Many years later, on that day every year, countless old orcs would still recall the terror of being dominated by the great demon god Duque, as well as the humiliation of being helpless in front of the demon god Duque. Chapter 575. They had thought that there would at least be a battle, even if it was a small one. Who would have thought that under the witness of the Alliance's leaders and countless soldiers, the ferocious beastmen would surrender without any backbone? Just because of Duque's words and the blue storm war flag fluttering behind him. 12,000 beastmen had surrendered. They had the most ferocious appearance, the muscles of wild beasts, and the weapons that could kill wild beasts. How could they surrender just like that? No. It shouldn't be like this. It shouldn't be like this. In the Alliance's army, a tall and burly figure let out a low sob. When 100,000 beastmen died in the sea of fire, he did not cry. When another 100,000 beastmen hid in the belly of a fish, he did not cry. When huge failures came one after another, and hundreds of thousands of his compatriots died, he did not cry. Because he knew that no matter how many died, the beastmen were still the beastmen he knew. The great and rebellious race that still stood in the world with their violence and bravery under the most difficult circumstances. Now, more than 10,000 people had bent their knees and lowered their heads, which they had never lowered to anyone before, even before they had fought with the enemy. Are these still the beastmen I know? Are these still the beastmen who dared to charge at the Gorons and ogres who were countless times stronger than them? Even when a thick chain pierced through his shoulder blade, and he was restrained by a huge metal torture device, and locked in a specially built prison cart, Orgrim did not show any signs of fear. But at this moment, Orgrim let out a cry that sounded like a howl. He screamed at the top of his lungs in beastman language. Stand up, beastmen. Are you still the great beastmen? Aren't you afraid of the punishment of your ancestors after you die? Stand up, beastmen. You are definitely not slaves of other races. Stand up, pick up your weapons and fight. You would rather die standing than live kneeling. Every beastman present heard the cry of their former great tribal chief. Some were in pain, some were hesitant, some were lost, but most of them were nervous and trembling. Orgrim had forgotten that he was roaring as a prisoner. If he was still the free and noble great chief he was half a month ago, every orc would continue to support him even if he was in dire straits. This was the iron law of the orcs that had been passed down for thousands of years. Either you use Makra to defeat your chieftain and make yourself the law, or you obey everything, even if you die. Now, even the great chief had become a prisoner of the humans. What hope do we have for ourselves? Orgrim watched in despair as countless orcs lifted their heads to look at him in fear. Then, they lowered their heads even more and pressed their foreheads against the dry, hot, crimson ground like slaves. No, Orgrim let out a blood-curdling scream. At this moment he finally understood Duque's sinister intentions. This seemingly thin and weak young human used his own method to ruthlessly knock down the backbone of the tribe. Something like a spine. Once it was broken, he would never be able to straighten his back. Duque was using this method to destroy the entire tribe. So what if these people escaped the Alliance's control in the future? They would only remember the fear of the Alliance and Duque. They would only live in fear. They would never have the confidence and will to fight against the Alliance. No. Orgrim sat down weakly. It's over. It's over. Everything is over. He muttered. In this moment of despair, Orgrim did not think of himself or his tribe. Instead, it was the last hope in his heart. Guile, the bloodline of his best friend, the former chief of the Frostwolf tribe, Durotan. He had sent people to the world beyond the dark portal and returned to Nagrand. After asking the great shaman prophet, he found out about the tribe's last hope. At first, he did not know what the prophet meant by the tribe's only hope. He only instinctively sent the few sword saints of the Fireblade tribe to protect his best friend's son. Now he knew. It was a joke to put his hopes on a beastman baby who was not even 2 years old. Unfortunately, he helplessly realized that this was his only choice. Only the Frostwolf tribe and Warsong tribe, which had not been completely destroyed by the Alliance, could form the backbone and soul of the new tribe in the future. Orgrim's cries gradually died down. He was careful to hide his hope. He did not even dare to look at Duque. He was afraid that this young and terrifying human who seemed to have predicted everything would discover his last secret. Behind him, Noxus heaved a sigh of relief. He waved his hand, and 10,000 Alliance soldiers rushed forward to control the beastmen. There was no war without sacrifice. Now that the situation was set, every additional Alliance soldier they brought back to their home was another member of their family. Anduin Lothar was a man who understood sacrifice and the reproduction of his race. Just as Noxus was about to suppress the beastmen, Duque waved his hand. "What?" Duque said calmly. "I want to plant an indelible fear in the hearts of these beastmen. This is more effective than any shackles or torture." "Oh!" Duque turned his head and looked at the most special king of the Alliance, President Kirin Tor, whose silver-white hair and beard fluttered in the wind. "Master Antonidas, can you seal the dark portal now?" Antonidas rode over on horseback. After he dismounted, he spread out his magic senses and carefully sensed it. After a while, he showed a bitter expression. The energy of the dark portal is too great. I'm afraid something will happen to me alone." Even though the dark portal was no longer in a high-energy state that could transport soldiers from Draenor, it was still something created by 2 demigods. If something went wrong, there would be a huge explosion, and all living things within a few kilometers would immediately be turned into ashes. Antonidas naturally thought of Duque. "Duque, do you remember the time at Alterac?" Antonidas said very softly. He was actually referring to the huge ice tornado that had wiped out hundreds of red dragons. That was the first time the two had worked together perfectly. In a sense, even though Duque could not mobilize such a huge amount of magic, Duque's ability to manipulate magic, even if Antonidas did not want to admit it, he had to admit that Duque's manipulation was above his. Antonidas's suggestion was actually to let Duque lend a hand again. Chapter 576. "Oh, it's okay. Alexstrasza knows. She said that it was her kin who went overboard. The Red Dragon army will not pursue the matter." Antonidas blushed. He had originally wanted to extort some money from Duque. "All right, I'll let you have it easy. You can perform and help me control it." And so, Duque stood on top of the tank, looking like he was about to cast a spell. Archmage Antonidas, on the other hand, was hiding in the tank, doing the dirty work. To be honest, Duque did not want to cast a spell now. Baron Geddon's mana burn was still causing him trouble. The magic that flowed in Duque's body was the lowest level of monitoring. He only used the system elf to help him monitor Antonida's spellcasting process, preventing him from losing control and warning him. For Antonidas, this was enough. Duque pretended to chant a spell on top of the tank. Antonidas, as well as the high-level Dalajan mages around Duque's tank, began to focus on summoning energy and filling their bodies with magic. There was not much energy left in this land, but the dark portal itself contained a huge amount of energy, and there were no measures to prevent people like mages from taking it for their own use. No, it should be said that there were originally. After the last master, Ghoul, Dan, died in the tomb of Sargeras, the magic that was originally set on the dark portal became a decoration. Antonidas and the other mages were now doing this, absorbing the energy of the dark portal and directing it to Khadgar. The old mage's long silver hair stood up, sweeping the roof of the tank. To the orcs, magical energy that they could not understand began to dance on Duque's face and fingertips. The wind roared around Duque, and the orcs even felt that there was lightning around Duque. The orcs seemed to have found the reason for their defeat. So it was such a terrifying human mage who defeated us. They began to hold their breath, not even daring to make a sound. Facing the door of darkness, Duque closed his eyes, opened his arms, and opened his palms. He slowly pushed against the door of darkness, as if he wanted to release all the energy he had absorbed earlier. Of course, this was only the work of the poor blue-collared mage in the tank. The enormous energy gathered in front of Duque and formed a mysterious, pulsating, glowing ball-shaped object with countless light spots hovering around it. Even without any knowledge of mysticism, everyone who saw this scene could easily sense this energy ball, feel its pulsation, and feel its condensation. Duque was very satisfied with the fearful and respectful gazes that came from all directions. Very good. His level of acting cool was already maxed out. Duque secretly gave himself a 360-degree compliment. Well, it's just to scare the orcs anyway, so there's no need for him to be proud of it. Heh. With the help of the system elf, Duque focused his consciousness on the huge spatial fissure and the energy it contained. He confirmed its location again and sent a clear 3D spatial spell model to Antonidas. Antonidas, who was below, shuddered, and a bitter taste appeared in his mouth. Is it really because of the difference in talent? I've just begun to sense the shape of the fissure, and this devilish little guy, Duque, has already made the entire spatial fissure model. With a deep sigh, Antonidas began to work. He quickly arranged the tasks of the various high-ranking mages in the magic communication circuit, and then informed Duque that it was done. Duque opened his eyes, and the aftermath of the enormous energy seemed to flow out from his eyes that were deeper than the universe. The Windrunner sisters beside him were dazzled, and the human soldiers and orc captives were shocked. They saw Duque suddenly put his hands together so that his palms were facing each other, and then he made a pushing gesture. The huge energy ball suspended in midair suddenly flew forward. The ball was elongated into a slender shape, like some special spear. An energy spear that was about to be thrown into the center of the dark portal. Its energy gushed out, poured into the dark portal, and pierced through the stone slabs that built it. Boom! Suddenly, there was a huge tremor. This big explosion shook many Alliance soldiers and orc warriors, and even Duque himself almost fell from the top of the tank he was standing on. The illusory black and green energy ball in the middle of the portal was instantly blown to pieces. Fortunately for the nearby Alliance soldiers, almost every piece of energy that was blown out was sucked into the portal that was about to collapse. The space shook violently, and after 10 seconds, the huge spatial fissure disappeared. The surging green and black colors were replaced by a blank space. Every high-ranking mage could clearly feel that after the connection with the world called Draenor was cut off, the earth began to breathe again. Standing on the top of the tank, Duque looked around, and he saw Lothar standing up in a slightly disheveled state. Of course, the more disheveled one was Turalian, the serious and responsible paladin. When he felt the danger just now, he immediately stood in front of Lothar, seemingly ready to use the Holy Shield. Not sensing the arrival of a truly destructive shockwave, Turalian also gave up on the idea of using the invincible spell. The paladin was covered in dust and small stones, but he didn't seem to be injured, and he smiled at Duque as he wiped the dust off his body. The dark portal has been destroyed. Unless another demigod uses an artifact to open it, our world is safe. Standing on a high place, Duque waved his arm and shouted, and suddenly the most fanatical cheers of the Alliance soldiers sounded from all directions. We are safe. The war is really over. Long live Duke Marcus. Long live Anduin Lothar. Long live the Alliance. Haha. Victory. We finally won. Whose tears were flying? Which man who had lost his loved ones was laughing? The war at the dark portal that lasted for 2 years finally came to an end. Although it did not last long, this terrifying war had engulfed the entire Eastern Kingdom. Every intelligent race on this huge continent was involved in the war. From the southernmost Stormwind to the northernmost Kuel Salis, every family had experienced blood, tears, sorrow, and pain. However, now this damn war was finally over. People cheered excitedly, revealing a long-lost smile from the bottom of their hearts. Everyone smiled and really relaxed their nerves. Chapter 577. The bitterness of failure spread on the lips of every orc. Many of them had come with the idea of conquering a wider world and obtaining a more fertile land for their clans. The cruel reality mercilessly knocked them down. The alliance of intelligent races known as humans, dwarves, and high elves was a cut above the horde. They were kicked from the position of great conquerors to the position of captives. The joy of victory spread in the hearts of every member of the alliance. People were cheering and hugging each other everywhere. Everyone patted each other's shoulders and celebrated their victory. They were celebrating that they had safely survived this terrible war. Aurelia looked at Duque's side profile and felt a surge of excitement that no one else could understand. As one of the biggest witnesses of Duque's miracle, she had watched Duque walk step by step from a penniless mage apprentice to a hero of the Alliance. She still remembered that 2 years ago, Duque was still a little boy who relied on the mage apprentice handbook that she had given him to start his career. Then she had spent 3 months in prison for this despicable guy. No matter how many times she thought about it, she still felt that it was hateful. Then this guy appeared as the perfect savior for Kuel Salis, who was on the brink of death, and saved the entire High Elves kingdom in one fell swoop under the gaze of the Silver Moon Council and Sun King. What was it about Duque that deeply attracted her and made her heart, which had been silent for countless years, so excited that she was willing to do anything for him? Was it the wisdom and vision that far surpassed the mortal world? Was it the shocking aura that forced tens of thousands of soldiers to retreat with a single flag? Or was it the prestige that made tens of thousands of enemies surrender at the sight of a flag? It was neither. Or perhaps it was both. Women were complicated and contradictory creatures. Aurelia didn't know anything else. At this moment, she only knew that she loved Duque to death. "Hey, Duque." Aurelia suddenly spoke. She had an urge to kiss Duque, but at least 30,000 pairs of eyes were looking at them. This made her, who had always been dignified and elegant, feel embarrassed. She was wondering if she should let Duque go down to the tank. Who knew, Duque? I love you so much. Yes, something happened that made Aurelia angry, but also a little unable to vent her anger. Ignoring the gazes of tens of thousands of people, or perhaps it was because of her flamboyant personality that she dared to love and hate, Sasha actually made the first move. She held Duque's face, and under the gazes of tens of thousands of Alliance soldiers, she started kissing Duque passionately. At such a close distance, no matter how loud the noise was, Aurelia could still hear the sound of her lover and her sister's tongues intertwining. Looking at third sister's face, which was extremely similar to hers, falling into a passionate kiss, and looking at the passionate crimson blush on her cheeks and neck, Aurelia actually felt as if the person who was kissing was herself. Unknowingly, Aurelia leaned over as well. At this moment, she was startled by the sudden loud noise. Oh, Sir Marcus, well done. Beauty and hero. That's clearly a hero and a hero, all right? Lady Sasha has killed more orcs than your leg hair. There were people laughing, jeering, yelling, and all kinds of things. Sasha didn't care, and continued to hug Duque's neck tightly, kissing him passionately. Isn't Sir Marcus and Lady Aurelia? You don't understand. Elves are very open-minded. It's very normal for 2 women to share a husband, or for a woman to have 4 or 5 open lovers. Oh, then Sir Marcus, kiss Lady Aurelia too. Yes. If it was in the past, under the seemingly relaxed but actually strict hierarchy, those fellows would definitely not be so presumptuous. Now, no one expected that the one leading the jeers was actually the seemingly old-fashioned young general, Reginald Windsor. With someone taking the lead, naturally there were even more jeers. With Duque's private soldiers taking the lead, the shouts were almost uniform. Aurelia couldn't hold back her embarrassment. On the other side, after hearing everyone's shouts, Sasha reluctantly let go of Duque. Here, you're my big sisters now. After saying that, she even stuck out her tongue mischievously at her big sister, and then licked her red lips, looking as if she hadn't had enough. She wouldn't have let go of Duque if not for everyone's request. Fist, fist. The cheers of the rowdy bastards soared to the sky. No, Duque, I still don't think it's good. At the crucial moment, Aurelia's reservations flared up. At the crucial moment, Duque's dominance leaked out. He forcefully grabbed Aurelia's waist with his left hand and locked his right hand tightly with hers. Then he kissed her deeply. Oh, the tens of thousands of onlookers were happy. Satisfied. They all let out all kinds of strange cries, and some even clapped. Aurelia was clearly embarrassed, but she was surprised to find that she enjoyed this feeling. The slightly rebellious feeling at the moment of celebration wasn't bad either. Standing behind Duke, listening to the tsunami-like cheers, sensing the support and trust of millions upon millions of people towards Duke, Servanas suddenly understood a little why his proud and arrogant eldest sister and his most curious and intuitive third sister would fall in love with the same man. It was simple, because the person before them was the great hero of the alliance, Duke Marcus. His name was a legend. His name was a holy one. He and the heroes of the alliance who fought alongside him were destined to become an indispensable part of the glorious history of the alliance. The war was over. The alliance had won. The world of Azeroth was safe. Even if it was only a temporary safety. This didn't stop the entire world of humans, dwarves, and elves from celebrating this glorious and great victory. From the southernmost Stormwind kingdom of human civilization to the northernmost Quel'Thalas of the High Elves, from the westernmost Turith that was alone in the sea to the easternmost Stromgarde that had just begun to rebuild its homeland. The news of the victory grew wings and spread throughout the entire Eastern Kingdom. In the taverns, during their leisure time, the most talked about was naturally the heroic epic of the legendary wizard and extraordinary commander Duke Marcus. Next was the Alliance commander Anduin Lothar, who dared to fight on the front lines. The Silver Hand who dared to launch a fearless charge against 200,000 orcs with a mere 12 riders. Uther, Tyrion Fordring, Sidon Dathrahan, Turalian, Gavin Rad Misfortune. These 12 paladins would become synonymous with courage for a long, long time to come. Mograine and Abendis, who still followed their duties and fought to the death on the front lines, also became the idols of countless young people. And Daelin Proudmoore, Lang Rin, Salas Trollbane, Antonidas, these kings who fought on the front lines, all of their names would become holy. Chapter 578. Many people thought that fighting a war was a tough job. No, in fact, rebuilding after the war was a tough job. Thanks to Dudian's planning and ruthlessness, the number of orcs that were captured was far fewer than in history. No one knew exactly how many orcs there were. Perhaps even Orgrim himself didn't know how many orcs had come to Azeroth through the Dark Portal. There were many illiterates among the orcs, so the number of orcs that came to the world of Azeroth was generally counted by clans. Anyway, there were no less than 1 million orcs that came to the world of Azeroth. Other than the 20,000 or so orcs who had followed Kilrog Deadeye, Kargath, and the other chiefs to flee in panic, most of the orcs had perished here. As for the captives, there were only 25,000 people. In history, there were more than 200,000 orc captives. Just based on the Knight's creed of not killing captives, they had to build shelters for these captives and feed them to these gluttonous people. This caused the finances of both the Dalajan and Stormguard to collapse. Most importantly, the orc captives didn't buy it. In the following years, when the power of the Devil's blood gradually faded from the orcs' bodies, they became less violent and dangerous. Some of the moronic philanthropists who didn't experience the first and second Dark Portal completely disregarded how these orcs had massacred villages and cities in the human world, and how much damage they had caused. Instead, they cried out for the orcs who had been oppressed and enslaved by the humans. Of course, there was no such problem now. 25,000 orcs who had lost their will to fight. This was a standard that almost any of the 11 countries in the Alliance could handle. Moreover, according to Duque's suggestion, other than the broad-minded Rotterdam who was willing to accept 15,000 of them, the rest would be shared equally by the countries that didn't suffer serious losses. They would either provide money or manpower to build a shelter for the captives. Duque's family planning policy package for the orcs was also passed by a large margin during the Throne Conference. Just like in history, the Alliance finally decided to build a total of 3 small shelters in the Hillsbrad Hills and Arthi Highlands. Duque got Lang to agree to lend all of Stormwind's ships to Daelin temporarily, as Daelin wanted to bring a large force to strangle Thornvale to cause trouble for the goblins and the Blackwater pirates. It was because of these greedy goblins that the Horde had a large number of warships, almost causing the Alliance to fall. Perhaps he wouldn't start an all-out war with the gnomes yet, but he would at the very least extract a shocking amount of reparations from these deranged gnomes' pockets that would make them ache for many years. In exchange, Daelin transferred almost all of Cole, Tira's civilian merchant ships and cargo ships to Stormwind to support Stormwind's restoration. In this era, reviving a kingdom with millions of people was not an easy task. Even though Duque had Edwin Van Cleef make preparations long before the invasion of the southern continent, and even before the main army had landed in Stormwind City, Edwin Van Cleef had already prepared the materials needed to rebuild Stormwind City. It just so happened that Stormwind City was completely destroyed, and the orc clan that controlled Stormwind City was a bunch of unromantic bastards. They tore down almost every wooden pillar in the city to make a fire, and piled up the stones to make a stable. The entire old Stormwind City, with the exception of Stormwind Fortress, was basically demolished. It needed to be completely rebuilt. Rebuilding Stormwind City, as well as over 100 residential areas in the Elven Forest and Twilight Forest, was definitely a huge project. Of course, it was not something that could be completed in a short period of time. Logically speaking, as an expert in internal affairs, Duke should be busy from dawn to dusk, unable to deal with anything. However, most of the time, the higher-ups of Stormwind could only see the figure of Duque's butler, Makarov. This mercenary butler had become the #1 representative of Duque in handling Stormwind City's internal affairs. The rebuilding of Stormwind City was handed over to the Mason Brotherhood led by Van Cleef. More than once, Lang asked where Duque was, but each time he only knew that Duque was walking around in his own fief, and did not know what he was doing. As for Duque, Lang and Anduin doted on him to the point of letting him do whatever he wanted. They would never order Duque to do something. Seeing that most of Duque's people were busy rebuilding Stormwind City, they let Duque do whatever he wanted. What was Duque doing? It was mid-December, and many places in the Eastern Kingdom were very cold. The Elven Forest was considered a relatively warm area. It was not spring all year round, but the temperature was around 18 degrees Celsius, which was a suitable temperature for a hot spring. In the East Elven Forest's Stone Monument Lake, near the large lake that had been renamed Windwalk Lake, Sylvanas was rushing through the forest. That bastard Duque! He has no self-awareness as a Grand Duke. Every time I want to find him, I don't know where he is. Sylvanas was full of complaints. With the surrender of the orcs and the restoration of the Stormwind Kingdom, Duque's title of Grand Duke suddenly became true. As the price for poaching the Windrunner family from Kuel Salis, Duque gave a large piece of land to the 3 Windrunner sisters. From the moment she got the land back, Sylvanas became an official countess of the Eastern Twilight Forest. Sylvanas did not even get to enjoy the luxury and happiness of a noble for half a day before she was immediately shocked by the tragic state of her fief. Night Town had to be rebuilt, and more than 1,000 people had to be settled. It was said that there were more than 3,000 people of Night Town in Hillsbrad, anxiously waiting for the ship to arrive, and rushing back to their former homes for the winter. After knowing what the new year meant to humans, Sylvanas was frantic. She had complained to Duque before, but Duque had dismissed her with the rule that a lord could not directly deal with the people of the lord under him. Now, the complicated internal affairs were driving her crazy. Who knew that when she got close to the hot lake, her sharp ears would suddenly prick up, and she would hear some terrible sounds. His sister's sweet murmurs made Sylvanas blush to his ears. Bastard! Here in broad daylight. No matter what, Sasha was still her third sister. Sylvanas was also depressed to death. Ever since the kiss in front of everyone at the Door of Darkness, his eldest and third sisters had completely fallen for it. She would not become infatuated, but staying with her sisters and hearing them talk about Duque all day, Sylvanas was really annoyed. That was why she dragged her fourth sister to the Twilight Forest. They had wanted to wait for Sasha to finish her business, but half an hour had passed, and there was no sign of her stopping. Queen Sylvanas could not take it anymore. She shot a whistling arrow in an obvious arc and hit the surface of the lake, causing water to splash everywhere. Chapter 579. 5 minutes later, a neatly dressed Duque stood in front of Sylvanas and explained guiltily, I accidentally found a hot spring my ass. What kind of reason is that? Queen Sylvanas was exasperated. What she couldn't take the most was that her elder sister was there too. So her elder sister had already been defeated and was lying dead on the round rock beside the hot spring. Now, her elder sister was so nervous that she looked like a little girl who had done something wrong and kept playing with her fingers. Give me a reason. Why are you so idle, Duque? Don't you know that millions of people in Stormwind are waiting for you to show off your internal affairs abilities? Are you going to let down King Euron and Marshal Lothar's expectations? Could it be that this is the true nature of the Alliance's hero, Duke Marcus, that I have high hopes for? After spitting out those words, Sylvanas felt much better. She didn't even realize that she seemed to be exasperated at his failure. She felt that there was no difference between this Duque and the Sun King Anastrian who had fallen into mediocrity after achieving glory. For some reason, although she was happy to see her sister and Duque getting along, she still felt a pang in her heart. Was it disappointment? Disappointment? Or did she hope that the Duque she acknowledged would be even more perfect? She didn't realize that she was actually hoping to hear an extraordinary and unconventional answer from Duque's mouth. Because I'm waiting for something big to happen that can affect the entire alliance. If I wasn't so idle all day, that person in the north wouldn't dare to make a move. Duque seemed to be hinting at something. Vanessa gently combed her slightly messy long silver hair with her fingers. Today, she was wearing a long white dress that revealed her back and a beige shirt. After a round of sex, she looked even more beautiful and alluring. Her second sister was a little embarrassed. Hee, I'm a countess, and there are more than 50 strong men looking for work in a small territory of Wind Lake. Do you think I'm a fool or blind? Where? Queen Sylvie asked. Unlike Sasha, who did as the Romans do, Illyria was still wearing a standard ranger outfit, but because the weather was a little cold, she wore a slightly tight-fitting green leather coat. I only know that they're from the northern Lordaeron continent. They all had very good excuses or cover-ups, but unfortunately, none of them knew that third sister and I could easily hear conversations from 1,000 meters away. Is it serious? Sylvanas subconsciously weighed her quiver. Ever since the end of the war, she could hardly find a use for her bow and arrows. Duque smiled and hugged the waists of the two beauties on his left and right, causing them to rebuke him. It's not the kind of battle you think it is. It's meaningless to get rid of these spies. In any case, what they wanted to confirm was that I won't interfere. It just so happens that I'm willing to spend some time with Aurelia and Sasha. What is it? Looking to the north, Duque sneered, a war without smoke, swords, and magic. Damn it. It's politics and schemes again. Sylvanas knew that it had nothing to do with her. Or rather, it had nothing to do with the Windrunner sisters. In fact, in the game's history, if she hadn't experienced that tragic death, Sylvanas wouldn't have awakened her talents for schemes. At this moment in time, she was still the slightly rebellious Windrunner ranger who loved nature and beautiful things. No. Actually, this has something to do with you. Duke wagged his finger a little proudly. Do you think it's comfortable to live in a wooden house built on the ground and made of chopped wood? Are you happy? Duke's words not only poked at the softest spot in Sylvanas' heart, it also poked at the hearts of the two sisters. With Duque there was love and many things they began to learn, get used to, and overcome. It was something that lovers of different races and habits had to face if they wanted to be together. They would endure and compromise, but that didn't mean that they would be truly happy. As elven rangers who loved nature, only the beautiful treehouse and the lush forest were their true loves. It wasn't the kind of treehouse made from a random tree, but from a real elven ancient tree. The feeling of breathing with the spirit of nature was something that couldn't be found in the post-war elven forest. In a daze, Sylvanas recalled the beautiful days when she sat on the edge of the treehouse dozens of meters above the ground, swinging her legs and humming. Sylvanas couldn't help but stretch her legs. Duque took a look. Yes, the legs were slender, with a graceful arc from the calves to the knees, and then to the thighs, showing off the roundness of the legs. Apart from fourth sister, whose body was still not fully developed, the long legs of the three Windrunner sisters were all devilishly beautiful. Duque only glanced at Sasha's slender legs, and then glanced at Aurelia's even more voluptuous breasts. He quickly looked away. No, if I become impulsive and become a beast, even God can't save me. Duque knew very well that Sylvanas didn't have any special feelings for him now. Duque sighed and stopped teasing them. The tree of life. When he said the word, the eyes of the three sisters shone brightly, starry-eyed. If I can get Alexstrasza to owe me a big favor, I can get a tree of life while maintaining my current close relationship with the Crimson Dragon Legion. That was Alexstrasza, the life-giver. The great existence who created the world tree. If it was her, it wasn't impossible. The three sisters couldn't help but fall into a dream of a better life. Aurelia was the most clear-headed. She was the first to react. It's not easy to make the Red Dragon Queen owe you a big favor, right? Generally speaking, there's nothing that can make them owe me such a huge favor. But he's different. The corner of Duque's mouth curled into a smile. This smile was a little sneaky. For some reason, Sasha really liked Duque's naughty smile. Speaking of which, the big thing that happened recently is that Lord Davar Prester who appeared out of nowhere in Alterac, right? Sasha asked. It's him. Duque's eyes shone with a fiery light. This mysterious lord's appearance could be written into a legendary novel. His territory in the deep forests of Alterac was burned down by the Red Dragon Army, which was still controlled by the Beastmen. Just a week ago, he actually had the ability to cross the mountains with a servant, pass through the destroyed mountain paths, and cross many canyons to reach Lordaeron. Chapter 580. In fact, in late November, when news came from the south that they had won the battle and the Dark Portal was completely sealed, the entire northern continent, Lordaeron, was in an uproar. This did not only refer to the people's uproar, but also the political level. In almost all the major cities of the northern continent, a large number of special convoys suddenly appeared overnight. The insignia hung on the convoys, each one more powerful than the other. Those were the envoys sent by the political leaders of various countries. That's right, the war was over, but how to divide the spoils after the war was the main point. The destruction brought about by the Battle of the Dark Portal swept across the entire Eastern Kingdom. The destruction at every level was quite shocking, be it politics, military, or people's lives. On the 27th of November, in Caer Darrow, Elugia, who had applied for leave from Duque to visit her family, met her father. To Elugia's surprise, her father's trusted aide brought her directly to her father's study. That was where the Duke usually worked. That was where the Bear of family's top secrets were stored. Even though she was the Bear of family's daughter, she was never allowed to enter. She saw her father. Although the Duke had a lot of white hair on his head, he hugged Elugia affectionately, which made Elugia feel a long-lost emotion. "Father, how many years has it been since you hugged me?" Elugia did not see her mother, which was not surprising. As an academic mage, her mother rarely stepped out of the research room throughout the year, so it was even more difficult to bump into her. Then, she passed through the study that was neatly arranged with files and documents. Elugia was slightly shocked, because her father had fiddled with something and opened the door to a secret room. Her mother said that this was her father's most private meeting room, which even the king had never entered. Duke Barav opened the entrance to a dark underground passage. Just as Elugia was hesitating whether she should take a step forward, her father grabbed her hand. Before she could react, she felt a hallucination from phantom magic. When she came back to her senses, she found herself outside a small hall. Elugia did not know where she was, but her intuition told her that it was a small room deeply embedded in the mountain. Opening the luxurious door, She followed her father in, and saw the famous General Haas. General Haas? Hello. At first, Illusia was stunned. Her good upbringing allowed her to react immediately, and her well-honed etiquette made her lady's etiquette impeccable. Haas, the loyal and brave General Alterac, had short white hair and a square face. Ever since King Eden's rebellion against the Alliance failed, he had been leading the remaining Eagle Knights of Alterac to fight on the front lines against the Horde. Not being able to participate in the final battle of Black Rock Mountain was one of his biggest regrets. More than once, he sighed in public about not being able to participate in the final battle. However, why is General Haas here? Illusia, I'm discussing with your Uncle Haas how to maintain Alterac's independence under the threat of Rotterdam. The threat from Lordaeron? Independence? A series of nouns with a sense of unease emerged, causing Illusia's heart to skip a few beats. Under the gaze of the two elders, Illusia knew that they were waiting for her reaction. Is the situation really that bad? I know Tyrannus. His kindness on the surface cannot hide his ruthless nature. He will make a move on Alterac, and this is the only chance to make up for Rotterdam's losses in the war. General Haas's voice was clearly heavy. It was hard to believe that this was coming from the mouth of a pure warrior. Duke Barov continued, "We have analyzed many scenarios, and the most ideal one is for you to be crowned the Queen of Alterac." Queen? Illusia was so shocked that all the muscles on her beautiful face froze. I'm sorry. I don't understand. Why do you want me to be a queen? Child, do you like Duque? Another voice floated in from outside the door. Illusia immediately recognized it as her mother's voice. Duke Barov and Haas were not surprised by Janice's entrance. Duque? Which Duque? Illusia lowered her head in panic, not daring to look her mother in the eye. There is only one Duque in the Alliance. Janice did not give her daughter a chance to play dumb. The elegant Duchess's smile was a little bitter. Because only Grand Duke Marcus can save Alterac from the fate of being annexed. They hope to make you the Queen of Alterac when the bloodline of the Alterac royal family is cut off. That way, you will have enough status to marry Duque. Duke Barov continued, I know that the Queen of Alterac is not very valuable, but for a Grand Duke, it is just right. If the marriage is successful, then Stormwind's army will not be completely withdrawn. With Duque's private army, unless that old bastard Tyrannus dares to risk splitting the entire alliance and start a war with us, he will have no choice but to recognize Alterac's independence. No, Illusia subconsciously wanted to refuse, but was interrupted by her mother. Little Illusia, do you still remember when even our family could not protect you? Whose knight was it who threw an iron glove at the face of that shameless bastard from Lordaeron? Illusia could not help but laugh. That's right, it was Duque. Recalling that scene, Illusia's heart was suddenly filled with warmth. This was a warmth that she had never felt in her own family. Duque and Miss Aurelia have already, and Miss Windsor. In fact, Illusia did not even know how to describe Duque's messy affairs. Duke Barov said, that's not important. The relationships between high elves are often messy. The important thing is that the human world only recognizes marriage between human high nobles. But Illusia was still very hesitant. There are no buts. There is only one important thing now. Are you willing to marry Duque? And is Duque willing to officially marry you? Her mother's words made Illusia feel as if she had been struck by lightning. She was completely stunned. We will give you 2 days to think about it. At this time, the higher-ups of the Barov family did not know that in just 2 days, their plans were all in vain. While they were plotting to maintain Alterac's independence and convince Illusia, Duque, accompanied by Alexstrasza, secretly met with someone no one expected him to meet, the Bronze Dragon King, Nozdormu. Chapter 581. Duque was elated because he had finally defeated the orcs and allowed Lothar to escape his fated death. The well-being of a close friend was more important than anything else. Think about it, the wise Ryan Rin who never tripped anyone up, and the devoted Anduin Lothar. How much help would their safety bring to Duque's future plans? Duque was very unhappy because the system had given him a terrifying notification that was comparable to a magnitude 10 earthquake. Congratulations, host. You have become an important member of the Azeroth, a special existence crowned as a hero. However, because you have repeatedly saved important people who could influence the course of time and space, the similarity between this world and the world of Azeroth that you are familiar with has decreased. The current similarity is 76%. Warning! Warning! Your modification of the course of time and space has exceeded the critical point allowed by the Bronze Dragon Clan. The Bronze Dragon Clan from the future is likely to launch a correction attack against you. At this moment, Duque felt a pain in his balls. How could I have forgotten about these guys? The Bronze Dragon Clan in the world of Azeroth was a typical neutral clan. Most of the time, the Bronze Dragon Clan would not do anything because they were given the responsibility of the Creation Titans to be the guardians of time and history. Duque still remembered that he had participated in several major battles in the game. Those were all moments in time to prevent the Burning Legion and other messy forces from changing the current history. Theoretically, if evil forces went back to the past and changed the past, such as killing the most important people in the past, then the current time and space would lose its foundation and collapse. Protecting history was to protect his current existence. Alright, Duque had a good time fighting bosses in the past. He really did not think that he would be targeted one day. What if the future Bronze Dragon Clan saw Duque as a scourge that would destroy history? What if the Bronze Dragon Clan attacked and killed Duque and the people around him? What if the future Nozdormu came to take Duque's life? Duque didn't know what the result would be. Unfortunately, even if he used his toes to imagine, he would know that something bad was about to happen. An unprecedented thirst for power welled up in Duque's heart. To the powerful and massive Bronze Dragon Legion, he and his forces were no different from ants. If he had the power of Medivh at his peak, with the natural stronghold of Karazhan, he would turn Nozdorm into a specimen if he dared to come. But now, Duque would never allow a bunch of idiotic bronze dragons who only knew how to correct history to restore what he had built with his own hands. If everything was reconstructed according to history, his subordinates, Windsor and Van Cleef, would die first, followed by Lang and Anduin, and then Elusia. What Duque could not accept was that Aurelia would have died in the expedition to Northrend a few years later. Could he accept it? Whoever accepts it is an idiot who gave birth to a son of AB*Teach. In the empty room, Duke cursed in one breath, feeling much better. Fortunately, he had the system. Otherwise, when the bronze dragons came to his door, Duque might still be in a daze. After venting his anger, Duque began to sober up. He began to carefully analyze the cards in his and the bronze dragon's hands. He seemed to have some ideas, but it was not enough. No, before I become stronger, I have to buy some insurance. Duque sent a magic message to the Red Dragon Queen. Yo, Alexstrasza, how have you been? Duque. My side is still the same. I heard that you won, that's amazing. I almost thought that without the support of the Red Dragon Legion, you wouldn't be able to win against those damned green-skinned creatures. Alexstrasza's face was full of surprise. They're just green-skinned creatures, I can do whatever I want. That's right, Zuluhid, who was responsible for enslaving you and your people, was also killed by us. Well done. The queen gave Duque a thumbs up. By the way, why are you looking for me? Can't I look for you if I don't have anything? You asked me to drink with you? The queen's yellow pupils shone with a shrewd light. Duque's expression turned ugly. Because he remembered this guy's terrible drinking behavior. Love in the chest. Tui. It's so boring to just drink. I actually found something, but I'm not completely sure. I'm less than 50% sure. Your thing is, when Duque finished telling Alexstrasza, the Red Dragon Queen turned pale with fright. She said seriously, this is definitely not a small matter. Even if it's only 50%, it's already very high. I'll go call them. Under Duque's guidance, Alexstrasza first went to the Queen of Dreams, Isra, and then to the King of Magic, Malygos. Finally, she contacted Nozdorm. Almost as soon as Isra's Emerald Dream connected to the Bronze Dragon's nest in the desert, Nozdormu let out a deafening roar. Duke Marcus? What the hell did you do? In the face of this sudden roar, Best Actor Duke and the other 3 Dragon Clan onlookers had the same expression, dumbfounded. The actor's expression was so real that Dormu, who didn't have the ability to eavesdrop on the other party's thoughts, was a little stunned. That's rude, Dormu. This time, Duque discovered a very important new situation and came to report to us. What the hell are you doing? Or did Duque really do something? Although she said that, Alexstrasza transformed into her dragon form without hesitation, almost completely blocking Duque. Looking at the dumbfounded Duque, Dormu started to doubt the information he received from the future. Although the future guy's words were a little serious, Dormu was a little conflicted. From what he saw, the future Duque had gone a little overboard, but it wasn't to the extent of going overboard. After all, it was still a good thing. So, from the start, Dormu tried to scare Duque. If Duque was really a spy or saboteur who destroyed the world by destroying history, he would definitely give himself away. The result of the test made Dormu a little depressed. Just now, when he roared, he added a bit of the power of time. If Duque was really a time assassin from the past or future of the world of Azeroth, Duque's body would definitely change in an instant. However, it didn't. Chapter 582. Was there a mistake? How was that possible? Could the future have made a mistake? Dormu couldn't figure it out. Of course, he couldn't figure it out because Duque didn't belong to the realm of time that he controlled. Strictly speaking, Duque belonged to the space faction. Without concrete evidence, Dormu didn't dare to make a move in front of his brothers and sisters. The huge Dragon King made of sand blinked and looked at Alexstrasza, who spread her huge red wings as if she was protecting her baby dragon. He felt a little embarrassed. No, actually, that what we do today will affect the future. Some of the effects will cause the future world to collapse. Duque seems to have changed the fate of many people recently. This has changed the future of Azeroth a little. Most importantly, Duque isn't a native of Azeroth. Dormu hesitated in front of Alexstrasza, who was glaring at him. He seemed to be thinking of a better way to phrase it. Isra, who hadn't spoken until now, opened her mouth. Her eyes were still closed in her human form. She looked like a sleeping princess with a delicate face. Her ethereal voice sounded. Change? I know that you're responsible for protecting the timeline, Dormu, but don't forget that Azeroth isn't completely isolated from the outside world. So what if there are foreign creatures? We are the guardian dragons. We protect the safety of all of Azeroth. Isra seemed to glance at Duque. It wasn't a glance in action, but a look in feeling. She continued, if it's beneficial to the world, even if the timeline is changed, it shouldn't be a big problem. After all, your ultimate responsibility isn't to protect the timeline, but to protect the entire world of Azeroth. Alexstrasza interrupted. If it wasn't for Duque, I might still be in that damned cave being humiliated by those evil orcs for who knows how long. The Red Dragon Queen was definitely the more careless type. However, the more she was like this, the more shocking her intuition was. Unbeknownst to her, she had stumbled upon one of Dormu's unspeakable secrets. One had to know that according to the original history, she had always been suffering. She was only liberated after the Second World War of the Dark Portal. Her dragon eggs had been stolen and smashed, and the Red Dragon army had also suffered heavy casualties. In any case, she had been miserable. Suddenly, Dormu felt embarrassed. For him, it would not take much effort to peek into the future. He knew about Alexstrasza's bitter experience in the original future. In an instant, the head of the huge Sand Dragon King drooped down unnaturally. Alexstrasza immediately thought of something. Wait, you've already foreseen that I would be humiliated for a while. It's fine that you didn't take the initiative to save me, but you actually opposed Duque to save me in advance? Dormu's face turned green. Damn you. I hate those female dragons with such strong instincts. They brought this upon themselves. Maligos, who was watching from the side, opened his mouth wide while Isra gently held his forehead. Well, The days of being imprisoned were still vivid in her mind. Alexstrasza, who had not yet vented her anger, flew into a rage. She flapped her wings violently and pounced. I bite with my dragon teeth. I flap with my dragon wings. I attack with my dragon claws. I sweep with my dragon tail. Nozdormu, who knew that he was in the wrong, was beaten up like a grandson. His neck was bitten off. Of course, for Nozdormu, whose body was made of the power of time, the body made of sand was actually just a decoration. Alexstrasza's attack actually did not hurt him at all. After a while, when Alexstrasza finished venting her anger, Nozdormu's body quickly returned to its original form. However, being stared at by this huge red female dragon, he did not speak. All right, Nozdormu, I believe that Duque is a good guy. If you can't prove that his existence is a threat to Azeroth's safety, then for my sake, don't target Duque, okay? It was clearly a negotiation sentence, but when she said it, a pair of dragon claws were on her waist, and her mouth was full of sharp teeth. She was full of the demeanor of a dragon queen. If this draconic language was translated to be more straightforward, it would be, I have Duque under my protection. Get as far away from me as you can. Duque's mouth was wide open. He was simply ecstatic. Originally, he had bought insurance and hoped to negotiate with Nozdormu under the cover of the 3 dragon aspects. Who knew that Alexstrasza would actually directly announce that she would protect him? Duque was so touched that he almost snot out of his nose. Well, Duque actually had a slight cold. At this time, Nozdormu's voice suddenly came directly into Duque's mind. Little guy, I don't know if you did it on purpose or not. Anyway, I want to tell you that I have my eyes on you. If you are really proven to be the destroyer of the timeline, I will take care of you even if I have to fall out with that stupid female dragon. Duque's expression turned cold. Nozdormu, I don't know what you mean, but I will continue to use my own methods to make this world better and better. I will also resolutely resist the evil forces that invade the world of Azeroth, such as the Burning Legion. Nozdormu's huge illusory dragon head let out a cold snort in Duque's mind. Duque's expression changed. His entire mind felt as if the earth was shaking. All right, I will bear with it this time. When the time comes, when the future Nozdormu goes crazy and chases after you, don't come crying and begging me. However, thinking about it, it was also a tragedy. An entire army, the Bronze Dragon race that protected the timeline for tens of thousands of years, this magical race that could travel through time, gradually became extinct. They were all killed by their darkened selves that came to their future and endless possibilities. The darkened ones killed those that were not yet darkened. Those that were not yet darkened, after killing their darkened selves, they also darkened. Then they returned to the past and were killed by their darkened selves. This seemed to be an eternal cycle of death. It was definitely an endless tragedy. Because people could not see the future clearly, they had hope for the future. However, because they knew the future, they were completely hopeless about it. Duque sighed in his heart. If I wasn't a transmigrator who successfully reversed history, perhaps I would have gone crazy and darkened if I encountered such a situation. But now, Duque smiled and extended his right hand to Nozdormu. I believe that the future will get better and better, right? After saying that, he raised a platinum plate that only had 1/5 of its original size left in his hand. Dear, do you want to shake my hand? Chapter 583. When Duque returned after dealing with the 4 dragon aspects, he was just in time to see the victorious Alliance army pass through the Elven Forest. To be precise, the Dark Portal closed on the 15th of November. After leaving behind the Stormwind Griffin Legion, the Dwarven 1st Infantry Division, and the 1st Mechanized Division, the remaining 200,000 soldiers turned back. When they first arrived, the army could only fight their way south. After crossing the Solder Bridge that separated the northern and southern continents, they had to bitterly pass through the wetlands, Loch Moden, Barren Land, Scorching Canyon, Burning Plains, Red Ridge Mountain, Swamp of Sorrow, and finally arrived at the Cursed Land. After passing through the Swamp of Sorrows and the Red Ridge Mountain, he would then turn west and cross the Elven Forest. After that, he would be able to board a refugee ship from the destroyed Stormwind City to South Shore. The people of Lordaeron and Gilnis, on the other hand, chose to go straight to the South Flow coast. When they passed by the eastern elven forest with fertile soil and lush foliage, when they heard that this place was actually the fief of the 3 Windrunner sisters, regardless of whether it was the humans, the dwarves, or the elves of Cuel Salis from Aurelia's maiden family, all of them were shocked and envious. Big sister, when we first heard that you gave up your position as the Ranger General of Cuel Salis and joined a human Grand Duke, we all thought that you did it for love. Even though he had been promoted to Ranger General, Hadgeron Mingi was still a junior to Aurelia. Yeah. It turns out that being willing to sacrifice everything for love is just a lie. Rofelma Theron stood on the hill with her hands on her hips. She looked at the majestic and vast forest in front of her and felt a little unhappy. He had only managed to become a general, but on the other side, Aurelia had already found a good doc. In an instant, she was equivalent to a Grand Duke. Aurelia was the Countess of the Eastern Elven Forest. Her fiefdom, a third of the Silvermoon Council's members added together, was about this number. At this moment, the Elven Rangers of Quell, Thelus almost had the urge not to go back, but to change sides and follow Illyria. I didn't think that Duque would really give me such a large territory. I thought it would be nice to have a small village. Aurelia was embarrassed. The faces of the Cuel Salis elves darkened. How did you get to this point so easily? For thousands of years, countless counselors in Cuel Salis had racked their brains and used all their power to squeeze into the Silver Moon Council just to get 100 or 200 acres of land. Duque face-bombed. Darling, don't you know that acting tough is the deadliest? All right, I'm not afraid of you being arrogant. I'll give you full marks for this. Anyone with a discerning eye could see that this had nothing to do with her being Duque's woman. This was the reward she and her Windrunner family had received for supporting Duque ever since the alliance was formed. On the other hand, the 4 sisters had personally killed more than 10,000 tribes. Such a magnificent battle record left the bystanders speechless. But isn't this too good? The fief was hereditary. Unless they committed treason, the king had no right to take back the fief. To put it bluntly, in 100 years, when the royal family weakened and wanted to become an independent country, the royal family wouldn't be able to say no. Of course, no one knew that Lang and Andoin had made the decision to let Duque be independent even if he wanted to. Every elf had an envious look in their eyes. Without comparison, there would be no harm. Looking at Aurelia's fief of more than 10,000 square kilometers, the Rangers of Cuel Salis all suffered more than 10,000 points of psychological damage. No, please allow me to record a video with a magic crystal. I'm going back to teach those fellows from the Silver Moon Council a lesson. Hadgeron Brightwing announced his plan wickedly. There was laughter on the spot. Be careful that the Silver Moon Council doesn't find trouble with you in the future, Rose Selma teased. If you're so capable, tell Cuel Salis to abolish the Rangers in the future. Hadgeron said stubbornly. All good things must come to an end. After learning that Duque and Aurelia were going to stay in their fief for the time being and not go back with the rest, Hadgeron and Rose Selma both looked slightly sad. Glancing at Sasha and the others, Hadgeron asked, Big sis, will you all come to the victory ceremony at the end of next month? Of course. As Aurelia answered calmly, she gently held onto Duque's arm. This was a declaration of identity. She, the heroine recognized by the Alliance, would come. According to the agreement, she would also wear Cuel Salis's Ranger General uniform that day. This was the last bit of shame for the High Elves. In fact, everyone knew that Aurelia would attend the ceremony as the Countess of Stormwind. Hadgeron and the others left, leaving only Duque and the others here. After returning to Karazhan and dealing with Khadgar, who had become as clingy as a puppy due to loneliness, Duque had a rare leisure vacation. He could do some shameless things with Aurelia and Sasha from time to time. They had been at war for almost 2 years. During the war, the future of the entire alliance was on their shoulders. There was no way they could relax. Now that they finally had a break, Duque naturally took this opportunity to relax. To the politicians of the northern kingdoms, what they were most worried about did not happen. Duque, the most influential person in the entire alliance, did not seem to have any plans to interfere with the situation in the north. Country bumpkins will always be country bumpkins. He's probably so happy that he's forgotten who he is after seeing his huge fief. But that's fine. Many politicians thought the same. Then, on the 30th of November, an unexpected messenger came to visit. The messenger was Lucia's mother, Janice Barov. "Welcome, Lady Janice. It's a pleasure to meet you, Duque." Thanks to the Barov family's help when the Stormwind refugees first arrived in South Sea Town, as well as their conversation, the two of them were not so distant. She seemed to know that Duque was not the kind of politician who liked to beat around the bush, and also knew that the family's thoughts could not be hidden from this terrifying young man in front of her. After some small talk, Lady Janice went straight to the point. Janice took a sip of black tea. She was slightly surprised that she could drink such authentic Lordaeron black tea in Stormwind, which had just started to rebuild. "Do you know the situation in the north now? Tarinas is likely to use this victory ceremony as an opportunity to find a way to get his hands on Alterac." Duque smiled slightly. "Are you talking about Lord Davar Prister?" Chapter 584. Janice was a little surprised. It seemed that Duque was not as indifferent to the internal affairs of the Alliance as the rumors said. According to the Alliance declaration, the moment the Dark Portal was destroyed and the Horde was defeated, Anduin and Duque automatically lost the authority to command the armies of the various countries. All military ranks in the Alliance were temporarily frozen until there was a new threat and they were forced to activate the Alliance again. This was only in the military field. In the eyes of the kings, there were only two commanders in the Alliance, Anduin Lothar and Duke Marcus. Mograine wasn't bad, but he was only at the level of not bad. He wasn't a real commander. As for Duque, after leading the army to save so many kingdoms, almost all of the 11 countries in the Alliance had to respect Duque. This was the main reason why the Barov family was so eager to get Duque on board the ship of Alterac. After the food purchase incident, Janice did not pay special attention to Duque. It felt like in just a moment, the seemingly immature kid that King Lang randomly conferred as a duke had grown into a giant that the Barov family and even Alterac had to look up to. Now that Duque directly mentioned the name that the Barov family and even the remaining forces of the Alterac kingdom were afraid of, Janice understood that Duque was not really content to be the Storm Duke. Janice's feelings were a little complicated. Duque's foresight, which had been proven time and time again, also made the Barov family's heart palpitate. Even her husband Alex had said that even if they succeeded in making Duque the son-in-law of the Barov family, he would not know if it was a blessing or a curse. Unfortunately, the threat from Rotterdam was the most real. Seeing how Duque had disregarded the past and saved Kuel Salis, she could only bet on the fact that Duque was a person with high sentiments. Janice sighed. "Since you already know, I hope that you can tell me personally as Lucia's mother. What should we do with Alterac?" The Lord of Presto had perfect identification documents. Unless there was a civil war, Alterac could only watch a person of unknown origin become the king of Alterac with the support of Rotterdam and betray the interests of Alterac. Alterac will become one of Lordaeron's provinces in 10 or 20 years' time. Duque gently tapped the armrest of the sofa with his right index finger. This Lady Janice was more intelligent than he had expected. If Janice had asked him in the name of the Barov family, he would have used his identity as the Duke of Stormwind to fool her. The problem was that she had to play the emotional card of Lucia the moment she opened her mouth. Of course, this made Duke a little unhappy. But seeing that Lucia had been with him for so long, and that she was the daughter of a high noble, helping him to work, accompanying him to war, acting as an emissary, and working hard without complaint, Duke really could not ignore it. Duque sighed and asked, "Before I answer your question, let me ask you in the capacity of a half-teacher and half-friend of Lucia. What kind of king do you think Tarinas Menethil II is?" Janice was stunned for a moment before replying, "A third-rate military strategist and first-rate politician. As long as he doesn't interfere with the interests of Rotterdam, he is a merciful elder." Janice's answer was very skillful. She revealed her own opinion without slandering the king of a large country. Duque leaned back on the sofa and propped his chin with his left hand. Since we all think he is a first-rate politician, do you think Torinas would let the person he supported waste a lot of time fighting against the Bara family? You know, the nobles of Alterac have almost all been wiped out. Only the Bara family is left. So what? Whether it's General Haas or the Bara family, we have used our actions to wash away the shame of King Eden's betrayal, Janice argued. Duque was silent. Left with no choice, Janice threw out what she thought was her biggest trump card. For the sake of the Bara family's all-out effort to save you and the Stormwind Kingdom, and for the sake of Elugia, can't you help Alterac? If we work well, we can make Elugia the queen, and you the king of Alterac. His calm gaze, as if he could see through all the secrets in the world, made Janice's heart palpitate. Janice suddenly realized that Duque was the kind of person who wouldn't be moved by mere benefits from Alterac. Duque flipped his right hand lightly, and a map of the entire southern continent appeared in front of him. The next moment, East Elven, East Twilight, Redridge Mountain, Upwind Trail, and other areas on the map were all marked with his storm flag. The Swamp of Sorrows and the Cursed Lands were marked in light blue. He threw out a sentence that almost shocked Lady Janice out of her wits. If I'm willing, Rin and Lothar will support me in establishing a nation with these areas as my territory. Janice cried out in shock. She couldn't help but be shocked. This land was shockingly vast, at least twice the size of Alterac. King Lang actually approved of Duque to this extent. Duque waved his hand, and the map disappeared. He crossed his fingers and rested the back of his fingers on his chin, staring at Janice with a determined gaze. But I never had that intention from the beginning to the end, because the third war against the Dark Portal was inevitable. Establishing a country was just a superficial idea. You don't understand what the world of Azeroth is facing. If you could see what I saw, you would know that Lord Darren's greed for Alterac is just a small matter. Duque wasn't trying to scare Janice. In this world, even the Bronze Dragon King Nosdormu couldn't compare to Duque. Duque was familiar with the history of Azeroth's development, and Nosdormu had to pay a price for peeking into the future. Janice bit her lip, seemingly unwilling to give up. Duque, are you really not willing to help the Bara family? Duque was silent for a long time. Only the crackling of the firewood could be heard in the living room. After some time, Duque finally said, I promise I will help the Bara family at the very end. Janice's expression changed. She didn't know what the very end meant, but at the very least, it would save her, her husband, and Elucia's lives. But would the Bara family still be the same Bara family after losing the fertile Hillsbrad Hills, Cair Darrow, and Dalen Mill? Janice stood up suddenly. Since Lord Marcus is not sincere, please forgive me for taking my leave. You're tuning in to the Wang Lin's Journey YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.